Hello there, and welcome to The Dream Scientist. I'm genuinely thrilled you're here. Before we start, I'm curious, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Whether you're nestled in a cozy bed, sprawled on the couch, or perhaps listening beneath the stars, it's a real pleasure to have you join me. If you're new around here, feel free to gently tap that like button and think about subscribing if you enjoy more peaceful, curious explorations like this one. And to those of you who have already subscribed, thank you so much. Your quiet support helps this little green corner of the internet continue to thrive. Now, I'll try my best not to make tonight's subject too captivating. After all, the goal is to help you drift off, not plunge headfirst into a photosynthesis deep dive. But if you do happen to stay awake, well, at least you'll have picked up something about the secret lives of plants. So, settle in, let your eyes relax, breathe deeply, because tonight we're going to uncover something truly remarkable. How the green world around us makes all other life on Earth possible. But how did something so still, so quiet, end up creating the very conditions for life itself? They sit peacefully by the roadside. They sway gently in parks, line our sidewalks, sprout from cracks in the pavement, and gracefully curl on your windowsill. They don't move fast, don't make a sound, and rarely demand attention. In fact, they often don't get any. And yet, without them, everything we know, everything we are, would simply crumble. Plants are easy to overlook. They're so common, so consistently present that our minds start to ignore them. A tree blends into the scenery. A blade of grass just becomes the ground under our feet. But this calm green world is doing something unbelievable every second of every day. It's holding the entire planet together. You and I breathe because of plants. We eat because of them. We build our homes, treat our illnesses, and even shape our dreams, thanks in part to the compounds they produce. Plants don't just exist on Earth. They create Earth as we know it. They helped form the atmosphere, sculpt the climate, enrich the soil, and cool the air. So, here's the big question. What makes Earth alive? What transformed a hot, rocky ball of elements into a vibrant, living world filled with colors, creatures, oceans, and ideas? And what role did plants play in that incredible change? Tonight, we'll gently trace the story of the green world, from its humble beginnings as tiny photosynthetic microbes drifting in ancient oceans to the vast rainforests, vibrant sunflower fields, and soft mossy woodlands of today. We'll uncover the miracle of photosynthesis and how it silently filled the skies with oxygen. We'll explore the emergence of flowers, the development of roots, and the hidden underground networks that connect trees in ways science is only just beginning to grasp. We'll see how plants enabled civilization by providing food, healing, shelter, and consider what might happen if we lose too many of them. From algae floating in oceans to towering redwoods, the green world tells a tale of resilience, evolution, and generosity. But this isn't a fast-paced story. Plants don't hurry, and neither should we. This tale is best told slowly, like the opening of a flower or the graceful unfurling of a fern in spring. So, I invite you to settle in and listen at the rhythm of leaves. Because when we truly learn to look again, to genuinely see the green around us, something shifts. Trees no longer fade into the background, grasses whisper their own stories. And we begin to realize that life, at its core, is a gift that quietly blossomed in the sun. Long before forests shaded the earth, before flowers beckoned bees, before leaves even existed, the world was ruled by microbes. There were no trees to climb, no grasses to sway, no oxygen to breathe. Early Earth was a hot, turbulent place, enveloped in a toxic atmosphere, a world dominated by volcanic gases, methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. And in the shallow waters of ancient oceans, something extraordinary began to stir. Among the first living things to quietly transform the planet were tiny, single-celled organisms we now call cyanobacteria. They weren't plants, strictly speaking, but they were the ancestors of something much greater, drifting freely in the sunlit upper layers of the sea. These microbes started to develop a superpower that would reshape Earth's future. Photosynthesis. Imagine this for a moment, a microscopic being that figures out how to turn sunlight into food. No hunting, no foraging, just pure light alchemy. By absorbing carbon dioxide and water and using sunlight as the catalyst, these tiny microbes began producing energy in the form of sugars. But there was a consequence. This process generated a waste product, something the planet had almost never encountered before. Oxygen. At first, that oxygen had nowhere to go. It reacted with iron in the oceans, creating massive deposits of rust on the seafloor, known as banded iron formations, which we still find in ancient rocks today. But as the oxygen continued to be produced, it started to escape into the atmosphere. Slowly, imperceptibly, the sky began to change. This was the Great Oxygenation Event, a pivotal moment in Earth's history that occurred around 2.5 billion years ago. It was one of the most dramatic transformations the planet has ever undergone, and it wasn't loud or violent. It was bacterial. Cyanobacteria, without ever realizing it, were terraforming Earth. Too many early life forms. Oxygen was a deadly poison. It destroyed cells and disrupted ancient metabolic processes. The first mass extinction in Earth's history wasn't caused by an asteroid or a supervolcano. It was caused by too much oxygen. The very substance that allows humans to exist nearly wiped out most of the anaerobic life that had dominated the planet. But from that destruction came something new. With oxygen in the air, entirely new kinds of life began to evolve. Oxygen made energy more efficient. It enabled complexity, and that complexity eventually led to multicellular organisms, including you, me, and every animal we've ever known. Cyanobacteria continued their work for millions upon millions of years. Eventually, some of them formed partnerships with other single-celled organisms, entering into symbiotic relationships that would give rise to the first algae, and later the first true plants. Inside the cells of every green leaf today is a tiny structure called a chloroplast. And those chloroplasts are the direct descendants of cyanobacteria. They still carry traces of their original DNA. Every breath you take, every apple you eat, every shady spot under a trial of it has its origins in that ancient microbial innovation. Photosynthesis didn't just nourish those early life forms. It remade the chemical composition of the atmosphere, laid the groundwork for the ozone layer that shields us from harmful radiation, and created the conditions for oceans teeming with life without meaning to. These microbes became engineers, crafting a world with breathable air, stable temperatures, and sunlight-powered food chains. And they did all of this without eyes, brains, or limbs, just molecules, light, and time. It's a quiet kind of genius, isn't it? To change the world simply by existing, by floating in the sunlight, and doing what you do best. No need for ambition or grand inventions, just the slow, steady rhythm of molecular chemistry. And perhaps what's most astonishing is that this ancient process still powers nearly all life on Earth today. Whether it's a blade of grass in a city park or a vast expanse of Amazon rainforest, photosynthesis remains the green engine of life. Every leaf is performing this age-old miracle, silently converting sunlight into sugar, exhaling oxygen into the breeze. It's easy to think of plants as passive, just sitting there soaking up the sun. But look closer and you'll see the legacy of Earth's first great engineers. What began as a microbial trick in a shallow sea became the foundation for forests, fields, and future generations. Without photosynthesis, there would be no breathable air, no food chains, no ecosystems, no humans. It is the quiet force behind every heartbeat, every rustling tree, every sunrise that filters through green leaves. And it all started with a microbe that learned to capture light. It's strange to consider that the air we breathe, the very thing keeping us alive right now, wasn't always here. For nearly half of Earth's existence, the atmosphere would have instantly suffocated us. There was almost no oxygen, just dense clouds of methane, carbon dioxide, and other gases that would make a modern sky look more like smog than clear daylight. And yet, here we are, wrapped in a delicate blanket of breathable air, rich with oxygen, calm, invisible, and completely taken for granted. But this gift wasn't automatic. It had to be made, molecule by molecule, over billions of years. And it wasn't made by wind or volcanoes or lightning. It was made by plants, long before oak trees and ivy vines. Oxygen was being quietly released into the world by cyanobacteria and eventually algae. These microscopic pioneers were the first to master the art of photosynthesis, absorbing carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, and doing it tirelessly in oceans. But at first, that oxygen had nowhere to go. It bonded with iron in the oceans, literally rusting the water itself, forming iron oxide deposits that still marked the geological record like a fingerprint of deep time. Only after the oceans were saturated did oxygen begin leaking into the atmosphere. Slowly, very slowly, the air began to change. The transformation wasn't instant, and it certainly wasn't gentle. Oxygen, for all its life-giving benefits, is also a highly reactive substance. To many forms of early life, it was toxic, disrupting their chemistry and damaging their cells. Entire lineages of anaerobic microbes were pushed to the brink, retreating to the few oxygen-free corners of the world. Some died out completely, others found refuge in mud, in deep sediments, or even in your own gut, where many still live today. And yet, as with many major shifts, oxygen's arrival opened the door to something new. With oxygen in the atmosphere, a more efficient way of using energy became possible: aerobic respiration. It allowed organisms to extract far more energy from the same amount of food. This single change spurred complexity. It enabled the evolution of cells with internal compartments, of multicellular life, and eventually the entire tree of animals. You could say that oxygen was the fuel that ignited the fire of evolution. It powered the leap from simple to sophisticated, from single cells to sea sponges, and from there to fish, birds, mammals, and eventually humans. But while animal life surged forward, plants remained the quiet chemists behind it, or still producing oxygen, still absorbing carbon dioxide, still setting the stage, and not just in the oceans anymore. Around 470 million years ago, the first true plants made their way onto land. Mosses, liverworts, and other early trailblazers spread across the damp ground, rooting into shallow soils and building new ecosystems from scratch. With more plants came more photosynthesis, and with more photosynthesis came more oxygen. As ferns, shrubs, and trees evolved, the land itself began to breathe. Forests expanded, root systems stabilized soil, leaves captured sunlight in vast sheets. The sky slowly filled with more and more oxygen until it reached levels capable of supporting some truly outlandish life forms. During the Carboniferous period, giant insects roamed Earth: dragonflies the size of hawks, millipedes longer than your leg, all made possible by the unusually high oxygen concentrations in the air. Even today, plants quietly maintain this balance. Around 70% of Earth's oxygen is still produced in the oceans, mostly by tiny phytoplankton. The rest comes from terrestrial plants, forests, grasslands, gardens, and even those overlooked patches of moss on a shaded wall. Together they act as the planet's lungs. What's remarkable is how stable this system has been for millions of years. Photosynthesis and respiration have remained in a rough balance, with plants producing oxygen and animals, fungi and microbes consuming it. It's a constant give and take, a kind of global breath that never truly stops. And yet, it's easy to forget that this balance isn't automatic. It's maintained by the continuous presence of plant life, growing, absorbing, and exhaling. Every tree you pass, every stretch of grass, every bit of seaweed in the tide is all part of a living machine that keeps our skies breathable. We often look to the stars for life, scanning distant planets for signs of oxygen in their atmospheres. It's not because oxygen itself is rare. It's because oxygen in large amounts is unstable. On its own, it reacts with almost everything. For a planet to maintain an oxygen-rich atmosphere, something must constantly be creating it. In other words, an oxygen atmosphere is a signature of life. And here on Earth, that signature is written by plants. They don't shout, they don't move quickly, but their work is constant and profound. Every oxygen molecule in your lungs once passed through a leaf, a blade of grass, a microscopic plankton cell. That invisible breath, the one you just took, was a gift crafted by green things. In a way, we're all walking around with little pieces of ancient sunlight trapped in our bloodstreams, repackaged through chlorophyll and released into the atmosphere by trees and algae. That breath of air, cool and clean, was built leaf by leaf over eons. When the air turned blue, it wasn't the work of storms or asteroids. It was photosynthesis, patient, persistent, and transformative. So the next time you see a tree, it might be worth offering a silent thank you. Not for the shade or the apples or the pretty leaves, but for something far more invisible, the very air that keeps you alive. For billions of years, life mostly stayed underwater. Oceans were the great nurseries of biology, filled with drifting microbes, early animals, and vast blooms of algae capturing sunlight near the surface. The land, in contrast, was barren, a rocky, dusty landscape dotted with volcanoes and battered by ultraviolet radiation. It looked more like Mars than anything we'd recognize as Earth. Nothing green yet dared to grow there. But change was coming. Somewhere in the ancient shallows, some forms of green algae, already skilled at photosynthesis, began adapting to a new kind of challenge. Instead of floating in water, they started surviving in places that occasionally dried out, the edges of ponds, damp rocks, tidal flats. These were harsh environments, but they offered something exciting: access to abundant light, carbon dioxide, and plenty of empty space with no competition. Over countless generations, these algae developed new tools to survive outside of water. They thickened their outer walls to prevent drying out. They formed simple anchoring structures to grip surfaces, and most importantly, they evolved ways to protect their delicate reproductive cells from drying in the open air. From these humble beginnings came the first true land plants, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. They were small, low to the ground, and utterly different from the towering trees and flowering plants we know today. But they were the pioneers, the ones that unlocked the secret to living on land. Mosses and their relatives don't have roots in the traditional sense. They soak up water and nutrients directly through their leaves and stems, relying on moisture in the environment to stay alive. This made them dependent on damp places, riverbanks, forest floors, and shady crevices. But within those niches, they thrived. In time, they formed soft green carpets that clung to stone and soil alike. These first green mats began to stabilize loose ground, retain moisture, and create microhabitats where other life forms could take hold. They transformed bare rock into something capable of supporting life. This was a quiet revolution, not sudden, not flashy, but incredibly powerful. Plants on land began to capture more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, releasing oxygen into the sky and further changing the planet's chemistry. As they spread, they helped to lower global temperatures by drawing carbon out of the air, influencing long-term climate patterns, and by covering the land in green, they opened the door for other forms of life to follow. With plants came food. With food came fungi, insects, and eventually animals. One of the most important tools these early plants developed was a waxy coating on their leaves, the cuticle, which helped prevent water loss. Alongside this, they evolved structures called stomata, tiny adjustable pores that let gases in and out. These innovations allowed plants to strike a delicate balance, keeping in water while still breathing. They also began forming symbiotic partnerships with fungi in the soil. These mycorrhizal fungi helped plants absorb nutrients more efficiently, especially phosphorus, in exchange for sugars produced by photosynthesis. It was one of nature's earliest and most successful collaborations, one that continues in the roots of almost every modern plant today. That as land plants expanded, they began to reshape the very surface of the earth. Their presence slowed erosion, created soil from bare rock, and changed how rainwater moved through landscapes. Even rivers began to behave differently once their banks were anchored by roots and mossy mats. By simply existing, these early green pioneers altered the physical and chemical structure of the land itself. They were ecological engineers in miniature, rolling out a green welcome mat for the rest of life. They also brought beauty in a brand new way. Think of the first time a landscape, once gray and dusty, turned green. Imagine early hillsides covered in moss, liverworts unfurling like tiny green fans, and damp stone valleys glowing with photosynthetic life. There were no flowers yet, no trees or grass, just the soft hush of primitive greenery slowly changing. Everything. Though mosses and liverworts may seem small and unassuming today, their legacy is immense. They were the first to build ecosystems above the waterline. They laid the foundation for forests, grasslands, and gardens. Every meadow and woodland owes its existence to those first steps onto land. Even now, mosses play a vital role in ecosystems. In peat bogs, they form deep layers of organic matter that trap carbon and purify water. In forests, they hold moisture and provide shelter for tiny creatures. In city parks and on stone walls, they remind us that green life can thrive in even the smallest cracks. Land plants didn't just change the look of the earth, they changed its function. They turned rock into soil, air into fuel, and emptiness into abundance. And they did it slowly, gently, with patience measured not in minutes, but in millennia. In a world that rewards speed and noise, there's something quietly extraordinary about that. Life didn't rush onto land. It crept, adapted, and unfolded one leaf at a time. It began, as so many things do, in the water. For billions of years, life remained aquatic. Tiny cells drifting in oceans, clustering in puddles, floating in the light-rich shallows of ancient seas. Algae, those simple photosynthetic organisms, ruled the green world. And why not? Water provided everything they needed: nutrients, support, and a natural buffer against the harsh ultraviolet radiation of the sun. But eventually, something changed. A brave few began to edge their way toward the shore, not with legs or lungs, but with their chloroplasts and cellulose. These early pioneers weren't plants as we know them, but they carried the green spark of photosynthesis into a new frontier. The journey from water to land wasn't a single leap, but a slow series of adaptations over millions upon millions of years. It began most likely with algae that clung to rocks at the water's edge, occasionally exposed to dry air during low tides. Those that could tolerate a little dehydration survived, and over time those traits became more common. Evolution, after all, is patient. Eventually, this lineage gave rise to the first true land plants, small, delicate, and surprisingly resilient. They weren't towering oaks or flowering vines. They were more like mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, plants without roots or stems, spreading low and flat across the ground like green paint on a gray canvas. These plants lacked the vascular systems of their future descendants. They couldn't pull water up through stems or grow tall into the sky. Instead, they relied on their surroundings to stay moist. You can still see their relatives today, thriving on damp forest floors and shady riverbanks, absorbing water directly through their leaves. That's easy to overlook moss. But these early land plants were ecological revolutionaries. By creeping over bare rock and soil, they began to trap dust, catch rain, and create microenvironments. Their tiny bodies softened the landscape. Dead mosses decomposed into organic material. Bit by bit, they built up the first true soils. And with soil came opportunity. Land plants opened up vast new spaces for life to grow. They slowed erosion, captured sunlight on dry land, and created stable habitats where none had existed. Before plants, the land was barren and hostile, unstable, and prone to temperature extremes. With the spread of mosses and their kin, the planet gained its first green carpets, and with them, a kind of insulation. They also reshaped the planet's atmosphere. As more and more plants took hold on land, photosynthesis intensified. Carbon dioxide was drawn from the air, oxygen was released, and Earth's climate began to shift. Over time, this led to global cooling and helped regulate the greenhouse effect. It's a quiet irony that some of the smallest plants had some of the biggest impacts. They didn't have flowers or seeds or roots, yet they made Earth a home not just for themselves, but for the explosion of animal life that would eventually follow. As land plants diversified, they began to evolve new strategies. Some grew taller. Some developed simple vascular systems to move water and nutrients. Others experimented with spores, spreading themselves far and wide on the breeze. But the original pioneers, the mosses and liverworts, didn't disappear. They're still here, still thriving in damp corners of the world, still reminding us of what it means to be a trailblazer. They may not have leaves in the modern sense, but they were the first to show that photosynthesis could work on dry land, that life could step out of the sea and make a living from sunlight and air. In a sense, they were the first plants to truly see the sun not just filtered through water, but shining down, brilliant and unbroken, across an open sky. And what followed, the greening of the continents, would change the world forever. Soil seems simple, just dirt underfoot, something to sweep off the porch or scrape from your boots. But beneath every forest, field, and garden lies an ancient story written in layers of stone, water, and living things. Long ago, the continents were mostly bare. After all, you can't grow a forest on naked rock. The surface of the earth was hard, cracked, and dry enough, the kind of place where roots could take hold or seeds could thrive. But life, as always, is persistent. And plants, even in their early forms, had a secret weapon: roots. The invention of roots changed everything. Not only did they anchor plants to the land, but they reached down into cracks and crevices, searching for water and nutrients. As they grew, they forced tiny wedges into the stone, slowly prying it apart. Rainwater followed those roots down, carrying carbon dioxide from the air and forming weak acids that helped dissolve the rock. This process is known as chemical weathering, and over time, it transformed ancient stone into the fine particles of sand, clay, and minerals that make up soil. Roots, simply by growing, became geological tools. They didn't just grow on the earth, they made it grow able. But roots didn't act alone. Beneath the surface, another alliance was forming, one of the oldest and most successful partnerships in the history of life: the relationship between plants and fungi. Fungi had already been exploring the land long before plants arrived. They lived in the soil, breaking down organic matter and feeding on decaying material. But they weren't photosynthetic. They couldn't make their own energy from sunlight. So, when plants stepped onto land, the two found they could help each other. The roots of many plants began forming relationships with fungi, an exchange of resources that still exists in over 90% of all plant species today. The fungi attached themselves to the plant's roots, extending their reach far into the soil in delicate, threads called hyphae. These hyphae are far thinner than any root hair, capable of slipping between soil particles and drawing out nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. In return, the plant shares sugars created through photosynthesis with the fungi. This relationship is called mycorrhizae, and it's the basis of a vast underground network that supports nearly every forest on Earth. It's sometimes called the wood wide web because through this fungal lattice, plants can share information, pass along nutrients, and even warn their neighbors about drought or pests. In the ancient world, this partnership made colonization of land possible. It allowed plants to gather nutrients from poor soils, to grow in dry or rocky areas, and to thrive where they otherwise couldn't survive. And together, these pioneers of root and fungus began building the underground ecosystem we now take for granted. As roots broke stone and fungi digested organic material, the soil thickened. It grew richer, darker, and more alive. Microbes, worms, and insects followed. Decomposers and detritivores joined the dance. The land was no longer just rock and air. It was a layered living system teeming with hidden life. Every forest today rests on that legacy. Beneath the leaf litter and fallen branches lies a living world as complex and dynamic as the one above it. Roots reach downward like fingers. Fungi weave invisible threads. Bacteria process nitrogen. Everything is in motion slowly, silently, persistently, and yet, it all began with the humble act of breaking stone, of digging in, of reaching down rather than up. Roots didn't just anchor plants, they transformed geology into biology. They connected sky to earth, leaf to mineral, and turned lifeless terrain into fertile ground. Without them, the land would still be bare, the earth would still be stone, but because of roots and their fungal allies, the world beneath our feet became a place where life could grow, thrive, and build its future from the ground up. Trees may seem like ordinary features of the landscape, tall, rooted, leafy, but in truth, they're architectural marvels. They are towers made of sugar and sunlight, built without blueprints, without metal, and without sound, and their arrival on Earth marked one of the most profound revolutions in the history of life. Before trees, land plants were mostly low and leafy. Mosses, liverworts, and small herbaceous forms clung to moist ground. These plants did well in damp places, but they faced a serious design challenge: how to grow taller without wilting, and how to move water efficiently against gravity. The solution was vascular tissue, a kind of internal plumbing system. With the evolution of xylem and phloem, plants gained the ability to transport water, minerals, and sugars over long distances within their own bodies. This was more than a convenience. It was an invitation to rise. The earliest vascular plants appeared around 400 million years ago. They were still small by modern standards, but they had a secret advantage: reinforced cells built with a tough polymer called lignin. This made their tissues stronger, stiffer, and more resistant to decay. It also opened the evolutionary doorway to a new form, the tree. Trees are not just big plants, they're a fundamentally different growth strategy. Instead of sprouting and dying within a single season, trees invest in permanence. They grow slowly, adding layer upon layer of woody tissue year after year. Their trunks are living columns. Their branches are scaffolds for capturing sunlight, and their leaves are solar panels held high in the sky. The first true forests appeared during the Devonian period, over 380 million years ago. These weren't the forests we know today, with squirrels and maple leaves. They were alien landscapes, filled with towering lycopods, ancient relatives of club mosses, and tree-sized ferns with no flowers or fruits. But they were forests all the same, dense, green, and alive with photosynthesis. As these new giants spread across the continents, they began to transform the very surface of the earth. Their roots plunged deep into the ground, breaking rocks, stabilizing soil, and creating new habitats. Their trunks shaded the forest floor, giving rise to layered ecosystems and vertical complexity. Their fallen leaves formed thick carpets of organic matter, feeding an underground world of fungi and bacteria. And above all, their leaves inhaled carbon dioxide in vast quantities. Trees are carbon vacuums, each leaf taking in carbon, each trunk locking it away in wood. Over millions of years, forests began to draw down atmospheric carbon dioxide at a dramatic scale. This had consequences. As carbon dioxide levels dropped, global temperatures fell. The planet entered a cooling phase. Ice caps grew. Ocean chemistry shifted. The very climate of Earth was rewritten by trees. In fact, some scientists believe that early forests may have helped trigger one of Earth's great mass extinctions, the late Devonian extinction. By pulling so much carbon out of the air, that it disrupted ecosystems worldwide. It's a strange and quiet power, isn't it? To reshape the world, not through violence or conquest, but by standing still and growing. Trees also brought something else into being, the concept of vertical life. For the first time, height became an ecological factor. Sunlight at the top, shade below. Species began to specialize in canopy or understory, in trunks or roots, in climbing or crawling. Insects adapted to feed on bark and leaves. Amphibians sheltered in leaf litter. Fungi formed vast underground webs. And with time, vertebrates would follow, feeding on fruit, nesting in branches, using trees for food, shelter, and strategy. The rise of trees turned two-dimensional plant life into a three-dimensional world. Forests became living architecture, with layers of light and sound and smell. Rain filtered through leaves, wind rustled through canopies, and soil hummed with hidden activity. These early forests didn't have flowers or fruits, but they had cones and spores and an endless hunger for sunlight. They expanded across ancient continents, turning bare ground into green oceans of wood and leaf. And as they grew, they began to shape the carbon cycle that still governs the climate today. When trees die, some of their carbon returns to the atmosphere through decomposition, but much of it is buried in trunks, roots, and sediments. Over millions of years, that buried carbon became coal. Yes, coal, the black rock we burn for energy's fossilized forest. Each lump is ancient sunshine, trapped in wood and pressed by time. In a strange twist, the trees that cooled the earth in the Devonian would hundreds of millions of years later be dug up and burned by humans, warming the planet again. But that's a story for another time. For now, the story is this. With the invention of trees, Earth found a new kind of power, not quick or loud, but steady and transformative. Trees turned land into living systems. They shaped climate, carved out ecosystems, and built the conditions for animal life to flourish. And they did it with no brains, no blueprints, and no hurry. Just sunlight, water, and time, stitched together in rings of wood, year after year, reaching upward toward the sky. Forests don't just fill the landscape, they shape the atmosphere above it. From their roots buried deep in the soil to the tops of their tallest canopies, forests are dynamic systems that move air, water, and energy across the planet. They don't just exist in the climate, they create it. When we picture forests, we tend to imagine a peaceful stillness, dappled sunlight through leaves, the soft rustle of branches, the quiet hush beneath a canopy. But behind that stillness is a symphony of motion. Forests are constantly breathing, cycling moisture and gases in a rhythm that spans from microscopic to planetary. Let's start with something simple, a single leaf. That leaf, like millions of others, is hard at work converting sunlight into sugar, but it's also releasing water. Vapor through tiny pores called stomata. This process is known as transpiration. It's like evaporation, but from inside the plant. Water drawn up from the soil travels through the tree's vascular system and exits through the leaves as vapor. It may seem small on a per-leaf basis, but multiply that by every tree, every shrub, every blade of grass in a forest, and the numbers become staggering. In tropical rainforests, trees can release hundreds of billions of liters of water into the atmosphere each day. This isn't a side effect, it's part of the forest's function. Transpiration cools the leaves, keeps nutrients flowing, and moistens the air above the canopy. That moisture rises, condenses, and often falls again as rain frequently within the same region. This is the forest recycling its own weather. In many regions, especially near the equator, forests don't just benefit from rain, they make it. The water cycle in a rainforest is a closed loop where trees pull moisture from the ground, pump it into the sky, and help send it back down. This is why large forests act like atmospheric engines. They draw in humid air from surrounding areas, and redistribute it across vast distances. In the Amazon basin, for example, scientists have observed what are called flying rivers, massive currents of water vapor moving through the air, steered in part by the forest's own output. Forests also regulate temperature, not only by shading the ground, but by influencing the reflectivity and energy exchange of the land. Tree canopies absorb sunlight, but they also release heat through transpiration, keeping local temperatures cooler than surrounding deforested regions. In areas where forests have been cleared, temperatures often rise, rainfall decreases, and soil becomes drier. Without trees, the local water cycle can break down. Clouds don't form as readily, and what was once a lush, self-sustaining system can begin to unravel. This connection between forests and climate isn't just a regional issue. It plays out on a global scale. Forests absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis and lock it away in wood, leaves, and soil. This makes them one of the planet's most effective carbon sinks. But it's not only about carbon. Forests influence the movement of air masses, the formation of clouds, and the circulation of rainfall patterns. They act as natural air conditioners, humidifiers, and carbon filters, all wrapped into one leafy package. One particularly fascinating detail is how forests can even create their own clouds. As trees transpire, they release not only water vapor, but also organic compounds, tiny molecules that rise into the atmosphere. These compounds can act as nuclei for cloud formation, helping to seed droplets and encourage precipitation. In essence, forests write the weather forecast, not just for themselves, but for the surrounding regions, sometimes even thousands of kilometers away. In temperate zones, forests help moderate seasonal swings. In boreal regions, they insulate the ground and affect snowmelt. In tropical areas, they hold the line between rainfall and drought. It's easy to think of climate as something driven only by oceans, jet streams, or solar cycles. But forests are key players, green lungs that exhale moisture and draw down heat, anchoring the atmosphere in stability. And this isn't a recent development. Forests have been shaping climate patterns for hundreds of millions of years. As trees evolved and spread across the continents, they didn't merely adapt to existing climates, they helped build them. Early forests pulled carbon from the air, cooled the planet, and helped tip the balance toward glaciation. Later, their expansion and contraction influenced monsoons, rainfall belts, and growing seasons. The rise and fall of civilizations has often mirrored the rise and fall of forests. Even today we see this delicate balance at work. The disappearance of tropical forests can reduce regional rainfall, intensify heat waves, and even disrupt weather in places far from the source. The climate doesn't respond to forests politely, it responds dramatically. But there's something comforting in that too. It means that planting trees, restoring forests, and protecting ecosystems isn't just about scenery or wildlife. It's about climate resilience. Each tree is part of a living thermostat. And yet, all of this begins with something almost invisible. A puff of water vapor from a leaf. Multiply that by 1,000,000, by 1,000,000,000, and you have a rainforest breathing clouds into the sky. Forests are not static. They are dynamic, responsive systems. They sweat, breathe, cool, and communicate. They are not only homes for animals or symbols of wilderness, they are climate machines, living structures that connect land, air, and water in ways we're only beginning to fully understand. A forest is not just a collection of trees, it is a weather system in motion, a water pump in operation, a climate regulator wrapped in bark and chlorophyll. So when you walk beneath the shade of a tree, or listen to the sound of rain falling through leaves, you're standing inside one of Earth's most complex and ancient pieces of natural engineering. And all of it, every drop of moisture, every wisp of cloud, every shift in the wind, begins quietly deep within a forest, where leaves turn sunlight into breath and trees whisper to the sky. Every forest, field, and windowsill garden is powered by something remarkably subtle, a quiet biochemical magic trick that keeps the entire planet alive. It doesn't beep or buzz or burn, it simply catches sunlight and turns it into sugar. And the name of that trick is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is one of those scientific words that sounds intimidating at first. But beneath the name lies a beautifully simple concept. It's how plants eat light. Of course, they don't eat in the way animals do. They don't have mouths or stomachs. But they do have an extraordinary ability to take three ingredients: sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and combine them into something new: glucose, the basic form of sugar that fuels plant life. And just as importantly, they release oxygen as a byproduct, which is rather generous of them. Let's start with sunlight. Light from the sun arrives at Earth carrying energy in the form of photons, tiny packets of light that travel across space at just the right energy level to interact with chlorophyll, the green pigment found in plant cells. Chlorophyll is tucked neatly into little structures called chloroplasts, which are scattered throughout a plant's leaves. Think of them as microscopic solar panels. When a photon strikes chlorophyll, it excites the electrons inside the pigment, giving them enough energy to start a chain reaction. That reaction allows the plant to break apart water molecules absorbed by the roots. The hydrogen is kept for building sugars, and the oxygen, the part we care quite a bit about, is released into the air. Next comes carbon dioxide. Plants draw this in through tiny pores on their leaves called stomata. Once inside the plant, carbon dioxide is combined with the hydrogen from the split water molecules. This combination is used to build glucose, a simple sugar made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. In chemical terms, the overall formula for photosynthesis is 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules combined with sunlight produce 1 glucose molecule and 6 molecules of oxygen. Written as an equation, it's 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus light gives C6H12O6 plus 6 O2, but you don't need to memorize that. The beauty is in what it does, not what it's called. That single glucose molecule becomes the foundation of life for the plant. It's used to grow leaves, stretch stems, send roots into the soil, and store energy for lean times. Some of it gets turned into cellulose for structure, some becomes starch tucked away for later, and some may be passed along to another organism entirely, a grazing deer, a pollinating bee, or a hungry human, because whether you're eating a fresh salad or a grilled steak, every calorie you consume begins with photosynthesis. Even if you're a carnivore, the energy in your meal can be traced back to the plants your food once ate. It's all part of a grand energy relay, sunlight captured by plants, passed along through the food chain. Photosynthesis is the only process on Earth that takes raw sunlight and turns it into chemical energy that living things can use. Animals can't do it, fungi can't do it. Only plants, algae, and a few special microbes have this gift. They are the planet's original chefs, cooking up energy from light, water, and air, and they've been doing it for billions of years. Before there were forests or flowers, before the continents even looked the way they do today, photosynthesis was already at work in the oceans, quietly shaping the future. The oxygen we breathe, the food we eat, the climate we depend on, all of it began with that simple light-powered reaction. What's even more remarkable is how efficient plants can be at gathering sunlight. A single large tree can produce enough oxygen in one season to support a family of 4. A field of crops transforms solar energy into calories that can feed entire communities, all without burning fuel, making noise, or requiring batteries. Of course, photosynthesis isn't perfect. Plants only absorb certain wavelengths of light, mostly red and blue, which is why they reflect green, and they lose some energy in the process of converting and storing it. But considering it all happens at room temperature, powered only by sunlight and water, it's one of the most elegant energy systems nature has ever devised. And it's not just about food or oxygen. Photosynthesis also helps balance Earth's atmosphere. By drawing down carbon dioxide, plants moderate the greenhouse effect and help keep the climate stable. Forests act as enormous carbon sinks, locking away billions of tons of carbon each year in wood, leaves, and soil. In this way, photosynthesis is not just a biological process. It's a planetary one. It connects the sun to the soil, the sky to the roots, the past to the future. It's quiet, patient, and utterly essential. Even now, as you listen, millions of leaves are turning light into sugar. Microscopic algae are floating in oceans, filling the air with oxygen. Trees are drawing carbon from the sky and tucking it away in rings of wood. The entire surface of the Earth is alive with green machines humming along at a molecular level, and none of it asks for attention. Plants don't boast, they don't rush. They simply do what they've always done: absorb sunlight, breathe in carbon dioxide, sip water through their roots, and quietly keep the world running. So the next time you step into a sunny spot and feel the warmth on your skin, remember that to a leaf, that warmth is a feast. And from that invisible meal, all life flows. Flowers are so familiar, so woven into our daily lives that it's easy to forget just how unusual they are. We give them as gifts, plant them in our gardens, and admire them in passing. But flowers are more than decoration. They're one of the most successful evolutionary inventions of all time, and they changed the world in a bloom-filled flash. Before flowers, plants had to get creative with reproduction. Most relied on wind to carry their pollen, the fine, powdery substance containing male reproductive cells from one plant to another. It worked, but not efficiently. Imagine throwing thousands of paper airplanes into the sky and hoping just a few land in the right mailbox. That was early plant reproduction. Then, around 140 million years ago, something extraordinary appeared: the first flowering plants. They didn't just evolve new ways to reproduce, they evolved beauty, bright petals, alluring scents, sugary nectar. Flowers were like living advertisements, calling out not to other plants, but to animals. This was a major shift. Instead of blindly tossing pollen into the wind, flowering plants recruited help. They enticed insects, bees, butterflies, beetles, even ancient flies to carry pollen directly from flower to flower. In return, the insects got a sweet meal. It was mutualism in action, a win-win arrangement crafted by evolution. This alliance between plants and pollinators set off a kind of evolutionary arms race, though a very polite one. As flowers became more specialized, so did their pollinators. Some flowers began to open only at night, attracting moths with pale petals and nocturnal scents. Others formed long tubular blossoms that only certain hummingbirds or butterflies could access. The shape of the flower, the time it opened, its color, scent, and even its patterning, all began to evolve in harmony with the creatures that visited them. This phenomenon, called coevolution, is one of the most elegant examples of nature's interconnectedness. A flower doesn't just exist in isolation. It's part of a relationship sculpted by millions of years of give and take, and the results are as practical as they are beautiful. By directing pollen more efficiently, flowering plants could reproduce faster and more reliably than their wind-pollinated cousins. They expanded into new environments, developed greater diversity, and rapidly outcompeted many older plant lineages. Today, flowering plants, known scientifically as angiosperms, make up nearly 90% of all plant species on Earth. Think about that for a moment. Nearly everything we eat, wear, or walk past belongs to this group. Fruit trees, vegetables, grains, herbs, cotton, coffee, chocolate, roses, all flowering plants. They're everywhere, and they all descend from those first ancient blossoms. And yet, for all their ubiquity, the actual mechanics of how flowers work are still remarkably clever. A flower typically contains both male and female reproductive structures. The male part, called the stamen, produces pollen. The female part, called the pistil, contains the ovary where seeds will eventually form. When a pollinator brushes against the stamen, it picks up grains of pollen on its body. As it moves to the next flower, some of that pollen rubs off onto the pistil, fertilizing the ovule inside. From there, the flower begins to change. The petals may wilt and fall away, but inside the ovary, a seed begins to grow. Often, that seed is wrapped in something sweet and appealing, a fruit designed to tempt animals into carrying it far and wide. So, a flower, in its brief and beautiful life, is a hub of biological activity. It lures, it feeds, it exchanges, and it transforms. And then it disappears, leaving behind the seeds of the next generation. This quiet efficiency is what makes flowers such powerful evolutionary tools. A tree might only release seeds once every few years, but a flowering plant can bloom and reproduce dozens of times in a single season, especially if pollinators are nearby and eager. Of course, flowers aren't only for insects. Over time, birds, bats, and even small mammals have joined the pollination party. Some tropical flowers are designed specifically for bats, offering large, bell-shaped blossoms full of nectar, often with pale colors and musky scents suited to nocturnal visitors. And humans, too, have fallen under the spell of flowers, not for pollination, but for aesthetics. We've bred them into countless forms, selecting for color, shape, scent, or longevity. Tulips sparked economic mania. Orchids obsessed collectors. Roses, with their thorny stems and layered petals, became symbols of romance and mystery. But beneath all the symbolism, every flower is still doing what it was built to do: attract, exchange, and pass life forward. There's also something philosophical about flowers. They are, in a sense, hopeful things, ephemeral, delicate, and entirely devoted to the future. A bloom opens not for itself, but for what comes after. It invites a visitor. It offers its sweetness, and then, often within days, it fades. But in that short window, it accomplishes everything it needs to: reproduction, dispersal, and survival, all disguised as beauty. Even now, as you rest or drift towards sleep, somewhere a flower is unfurling. Somewhere a bee is finding its path through a field, and somewhere, without fanfare, a seed begins to form in the quiet chamber of a blossom. It is a quiet revolution still happening all around USA, revolution not of noise or speed, but of color, scent, and cooperation. And the fact that it's still working after over 100 million years is perhaps the greatest testament to its power. The rise of flowers didn't just add beauty to the world. It reshaped ecosystems, food webs, and the very way life reproduces on land. All with a bloom and a breeze and a bit of borrowed flight. Plants may be rooted to the ground, but their offspring are surprisingly well-traveled. They've cracked a fundamental biological challenge: how to spread their genes across the landscape. without ever taking a step. No legs, no wings, no fins. Yet, seeds find their way into tree canopies, mountaintops, riverbanks, deserts, and sometimes even across oceans. At the heart of this elegant strategy lies a simple truth. Staying in one spot forever is a risky business. A parent plant doesn't want all its seedlings growing in its shadow, fighting over sunlight, nutrients, and water. It wants distant space for the next generation to thrive, and to make that happen, it uses an arsenal of clever dispersal tricks. Wind is one of the oldest allies. It's free, everywhere, and always moving. Plants adapted by designing seeds light enough to float, glide, or spin through the air. Think of dandelions, each one a tiny parachute ready to ride the breeze to the next open patch of soil. Or maple seeds, which whirl to the ground like miniature helicopters. Some grasses even launch their seeds into the air with a little spring-loaded flick. But air isn't the only vehicle. Water is another excellent courier, especially for plants living near rivers, lakes, or coasts. Seeds that drift can travel incredible distances. The coconut is perhaps the most famous aquatic seed, buoyant and able to survive months at sea before washing ashore and sprouting on a distant beach. It's a floating nursery complete with food and a hard protective shell. Then there are the plants that use animals as chauffeurs. Some seeds hitch a ride by clinging to fur, feathers, or socks with tiny hooks or barbs. If you've ever pulled burrs off your pants after a walk in the woods, congratulations, you've been recruited as a seed dispersal agent. Other plants are even more persuasive. They don't just attach seeds to animals. They get animals to want them. This is where fruit enters the story. Fruit is a botanical bribe. It's the sugar-wrapped incentive that convinces animals to carry seeds far and wide. The bright color, the juicy texture, the sweet smell, all of it is designed to draw in birds, mammals, reptiles, or even insects. They eat the fruit, swallow the seeds, and later, sometimes hours or even days later, those seeds are deposited elsewhere, surrounded by a helpful bit of natural fertilizer. From the plant's perspective, it's brilliant. The fruit serves no vital function to the plant itself. It exists purely to be consumed. Its only job is to tempt and reward the creatures that can help spread the next generation. Apples, cherries, berries, bananas, and tomatoes are all examples of this delicious evolutionary exchange. Some plants go a step further and time their fruiting to coincide with animal migration patterns. Others develop fruits with tough seed coatings that must pass through an animal's digestive tract before germination can even begin. In some cases, seeds won't sprout unless they've been scraped or softened by the acids in a stomach. It's nature's version of a security system, ensuring that the seed only grows once it's reached a suitable distance from home. Of course, not all plants are so polite. Some are dramatic, even violent. There are seed pods that build up internal pressure until pop they explode, flinging seeds several meters in every direction. The sandbox tree, sometimes nicknamed a dynamite tree, can launch its seeds at speeds fast enough to make a sharp snapping sound when the pod bursts. Another, called the squirting cucumber, propels its seeds by blasting them out in a spray of liquid. This explosive dispersal is risky, but effective. A sudden burst that catches the breeze or throws seeds into less crowded soil. It may not be subtle, but it works. Then there are plants that build elaborate structures to maximize their chances. Some seeds are winged like those of the pine or sycamore. Others are shaped like gliders or umbrellas. A few have hygroscopic horns, little appendages that curl and uncurl in response to moisture, helping the seed walk itself into the soil over time. Some plants, like the remarkable mistletoe, take an entirely different route. Their seeds are sticky and designed to glue themselves onto tree branches after being eaten and excreted by birds. There, the new plant grows not in the soil, but on the limbs of another plant, beginning its life as a perched guest high in the canopy. No matter the strategy, wind, water, animal, explosion, or mechanical trickery, the goal is always the same: movement. A plant's seeds are its only chance to leave home, to escape the shade of the parent, to find fresh ground, and start again. And what a variety of solutions plants have evolved to solve this single problem. It's like a natural showcase of invention, all powered by quiet necessity. For humans, these dispersal methods have shaped the foods we eat, the clothes we wear, and the ecosystems we live in. Our agriculture depends on plants with reliable seed production and predictable dispersal. Our diets are filled with fruits evolved to tempt creatures like us, and many of the landscapes we value, forests, meadows, wetlands, are shaped in large part by where seeds manage to land, grow, and thrive. What's particularly impressive is how little energy some of these strategies require. A dandelion doesn't need to climb a mountain or swim across a river. It just needs to lift a few tiny umbrellas into the wind and trust the breeze to do the rest. A cherry tree doesn't need legs. It needs birds with appetites and flight paths. And while we may think of movement as something that requires motion, plants have shown that it can also be accomplished through design, through temptation, through patience. Inside each seed is a blueprint for an entire organism: roots, stems, leaves, flowers, even future seeds. Wrapped around that blueprint might be a tough husk, a tasty fruit, or a gliding wing. Whatever the package, it is a message from one plant to the world: carry me, let me grow, let me try again. And somehow, without walking or talking or traveling at all, they do. The plants that feed the world don't often make headlines. They're not rare, exotic, or particularly glamorous. You probably see them every day in the form of toast, noodles, cereal, or rice. They fill kitchen shelves and market stalls, and quietly, steadily, they support nearly every human life on Earth. Rice, wheat, maize, corn, and potatoes. For humble crops that together provide the bulk of the calories consumed by the global population. They're not just plants, they're civilizations in disguise. But to understand their importance, we have to travel back in time, thousands of years, to a world where people lived as nomads, hunting wild animals and gathering whatever plants they could find. Food was unpredictable, life was mobile, and survival depended on the whims of weather, migration, and chance. Then something changed. Small groups of humans began to notice patterns. Certain plants grew better in certain soils at certain times of the year. Some seeds tasted better. Some were easier to grind or store or cook. And with slow, patient experimentation, humans began to shape the plants they relied on. This was the dawn of agriculture. Not a single moment, but a slow unfolding that happened independently in many parts of the world. In the Fertile Crescent, people began cultivating wheat and barley. In China, it was millet and rice. In Mesoamerica, maize. In the Andes, potatoes. In each case, wild plants were slowly tamed, selected for traits like bigger seeds, thinner husks, and tastier starch. These weren't instant transformations. It took generations, even centuries, of planting, harvesting, and replanting the seeds of the best-performing individuals. Domestication is slow science, but the impact was anything but slow. With reliable crops came surplus food. With surplus food came settled communities, villages, and eventually cities, writing systems, trade, religion, and governance. All of it rests on the dependable miracle of domesticated plants. A stable food supply meant fewer people had to hunt or gather, allowing others to specialize as builders, artisans, priests, or scholars. Rice is now the most widely consumed staple food in the world. It feeds more than half of humanity every single day. And yet, the wild ancestor of rice, a scrappy grass with small seeds, looked nothing like the polished grains in your cupboard. It was cultivated first in the Yangtze River Valley in southern China and over time became central not only to diets but to cultures, economies, and even religious rituals. Wheat, originally from the Near East, transformed the diets of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its ability to be ground into flour and turned into bread made it a symbol of abundance and, in many cultures, life itself. The phrase bread and butter is no accident. Wheat-based bread became synonymous with sustenance. Maize, or corn, was first domesticated in what is now southern Mexico from a wild grass called teosinte. The transformation is astonishing. Teosinte has tiny, hard kernels, but through centuries of cultivation, early farmers shaped it into the large, golden ears of corn we know today. Maize became the foundation of civilizations like the Maya and the Aztecs, and today it feeds billions, not just directly, but as animal feed, cooking oil, corn syrup, and biofuel. And then there's the potato. Native to the Andes, the potato was a miracle in root form, calorie-dense, nutritious, and easy to grow in cold, high-altitude climates. When it was introduced to Europe in the 16th century, it quietly helped fuel population growth, urbanization, and industrialization. Few plants have had such an outsized impact, and yet it all begins with an unassuming tuber. These crops, along with beans, lentils, yams, and others, form the bedrock of global food security. They are the result of ancient human generations of farmers observing, testing, and adapting plants to suit changing environments. But while humans shaped these plants, the reverse is also true. Plants shaped us, agriculture changed our teeth, our digestion, our bones, and even our behavior. It bound us to the land, to seasons, and to systems of cooperation and labor. And the power of these plants continues today. More than 90% of humanity's calories come from just over a dozen plant species. That's a breathtaking dependence and a reminder of how much we rely on a few quiet green allies. It's easy to overlook their significance because they're so woven into daily life. A sandwich seems ordinary, a bowl of rice, routine, but behind every meal is a story of selection, evolution, and survival, a story of plants and people growing together over millennia. There's also a quiet brilliance in how these plants reproduce. Many have been bred to produce seeds that are easy to gather and replant. Others clone themselves underground, as with potatoes, ensuring a reliable harvest with minimal effort. Their success is our success. But it's not just about biology. These crops are embedded in culture. Think of harvest festivals, bread-breaking ceremonies, rice-planting songs, or maize-based creation myths. In almost every society, staple crops carry spiritual and symbolic weight. They represent more than food. They symbolize connection, tradition, and continuity. Of course, there are challenges, too. Over-reliance on a few species makes our food systems vulnerable to pests, disease, and climate change. Preserving biodiversity, protecting wild relatives, and investing in sustainable farming are more important than ever. Still, it's worth pausing to appreciate the quiet brilliance of domesticated plants. They don't draw attention to themselves. They don't demand applause, but they are among the most influential forces in human history. They have fed empires, survived droughts, crossed oceans, and sustained billions, all without moving from where they were planted. And even now, somewhere in a field or a paddy, green shoots are rising through the soil, leaves are catching sunlight, roots are drawing in water, grains are filling with starch. It's happening quietly, as it always has. The plants that feed the world don't ask much, just soil, sunlight, and time. But from that, they give everything. Throughout human history, plants have been more than just food or shelter. They've also been medicine. Long before microscopes and lab coats, people turned to the forest, the field, and the garden in search of relief. From aching heads to deadly fevers, the natural world has long been a kind of pharmacy, one that doesn't buzz or beep, but grows quietly in the sun. And remarkably, many of those ancient cures still form the backbone of modern medicine. Some of the most powerful drugs we have today were first discovered not in a laboratory, but in the bark of a tree, the bulb of a flower, or the root of a shrub. Take aspirin, for example. This humble little pill, found in millions of medicine cabinets around the world, traces its lineage back to the willow tree. For thousands of years, various cultures, from the Sumerians to the ancient Greeks, used willow bark to treat pain and fever. It wasn't until the 19th century that scientists isolated the active compound salicin and developed a more refined version called acetylsalicylic acid that became aspirin, one of the most widely used medications in history. Another plant with a world-changing impact is the cinchona tree. Native to the high forests of South America, its bark contains quinine, a compound that became humanity's first real weapon against malaria. European colonists and explorers quickly adopted it, and quinine's use spread globally. For centuries, it was the frontline treatment against a disease that still affects millions. Even today, derivatives of quinine continue to play a role in anti-malarial therapies. Then there's the opium poppy, a flower with a complicated legacy. From its seed pods comes a milky latex rich in powerful alkaloids, including morphine and codeine. Used wisely, morphine is one of the most effective painkillers ever discovered. Used unwisely, it has fueled addiction and suffering. But this duality is not the plant's fault. Plants simply offer the chemistry. It's up to us how to wield it. The list goes on. The Pacific yew tree gave us Taxol, a compound used to treat certain cancers. The rosy periwinkle, a small flowering plant from Madagascar, led to the development of drugs that drastically increase survival rates for childhood leukemia. Foxglove, with its delicate bell-shaped flowers, contains digitalis, a compound that can regulate heartbeats. And then there are traditional medicines and herbal remedies that, while sometimes dismissed, have inspired countless modern drugs. In traditional Chinese medicine, Indian Ayurveda, and indigenous healing systems around the world, plants have long held a central role. Some of these practices were based on centuries of trial and error. Others were grounded in careful Observation of how animals use plants to self-medicate, a phenomenon known as zoo, PHARMACOGNOSY. It's easy to forget that the pharmaceutical industry, with all its white lab coats and high-tech instruments, still leans heavily on nature. Many drug discovery programs begin by screening compounds found in plants. After all, plants can't run away from predators. Instead, they evolve chemistry, compounds to deter insects, discourage fungi, or resist bacteria. Some of those same compounds turn out to be incredibly useful to us. The average plant produces hundreds of unique chemicals. These are called secondary metabolites, not essential for survival, but helpful for defense and communication. Alkaloids, flavonoids, tannins. It's a long and beautiful list of molecular creativity, and within it lies the potential to treat inflammation, infection, even neurological conditions. Of course, not every plant-based remedy is effective. Some are harmless placebos. Others can be dangerous or toxic. Nature isn't always gentle. Hemlock is a plant, so is deadly nightshade. Just because something is natural doesn't mean it's safe. But the broader point remains. Plants are master chemists, and their chemical toolbox continues to inspire science and save lives. It's also worth noting that many modern drugs are not taken directly from plants anymore, but are synthesized in labs. This isn't a rejection of nature. It's an effort to replicate and refine what plants do, sometimes improving stability, dosage control, or availability. But even in these synthetic forms, the root idea is botanical. The connection between plants and medicine also goes beyond chemistry. There's healing in the act of tending a garden, in walking through a forest, in sitting beside a blooming flower. This is sometimes called green therapy, and research suggests that exposure to nature, even just viewing greenery through a window, can lower stress, reduce blood pressure, and improve recovery from illness. In this way, plants don't only offer cures in pill form, they offer presence, patience, and peace. A blooming lavender plant might calm the nerves. The scent of pine might stir memory. The texture of moss, the rustle of leaves, the stillness of a tree, these are all forms of comfort that resist quantification but feel deeply real, that in plants have been healers not just of individuals, but of entire communities. During times of scarcity, war, or pandemic, when manufactured medicines were unavailable, people returned to the garden. Medicinal herb beds, apothecary shelves, tea infusions, they became sources of hope and resilience. Today, as modern medicine continues to advance, we are seeing a renewed interest in plant-based therapies, not as replacements, but as companions. Research into cannabinoids, psychedelics like psilocybin and ayahuasca, and ancient herbs like ashwagandha and turmeric is opening new frontiers in mental health, pain management, and neuroplasticity. And through it all, the plants continue to grow quietly, without demand. A tree does not know it's harboring the next breakthrough. A flower does not bloom for applause. They simply do what they have always done, produce chemistry, offer their compounds, and trust the rest to time. Somewhere in a rainforest, there may be a leaf holding the cure to a disease we don't even know yet. Somewhere in a desert, a root with the power to calm a troubled mind. The green world still holds secrets, not because it hides them, but because we have not yet learned how to listen. In every field and forest, there is healing, not always in obvious forms and not always in ways that can be bottled, but it's there, in bark, root, blossom, and breeze, a quiet partnership as old as breath itself, between plants and the people who walk among them. It's tempting to think of plants as passive, just green background characters in a world of moving animals and thinking humans. They don't chase prey, build nests, or scribble in notebooks. They don't have eyes or ears or brains. But in recent years, science has begun to uncover a surprising truth. Plants are far more aware, responsive, and communicative than we once believed. They don't think the way we do. They don't ponder philosophy or plan their week. But they do perceive, respond, and even remember. And in their own quiet, rooted way, they have found astonishing ways to sense the world and adapt to it. Let's start with communication, because, yes, plants talk not with words or sound waves, but with chemistry. When a plant is under attack, it can release volatile organic compounds, VOX, tiny molecules that drift through the air like invisible alarm signals. These chemicals can warn neighboring plants that danger is near. In response, those plants may boost their own defenses, producing bitter compounds or toughening their leaves. In one famous experiment, researchers studied a group of acacia trees in Africa. When giraffes began nibbling on their leaves, The trees quickly ramped up production of tannins, as chemicals that make the leaves unappetizing and even toxic in large amounts. But more intriguingly, nearby trees also began producing tannins even before the giraffes reached them. The trees weren't just reacting, they were receiving a warning and preparing themselves in advance. Similar behavior has been observed in tomato plants, sagebrush, and even grasses. When one is wounded, others seem to notice. It's not gossip in the human sense, but it is information sharing, a kind of botanical bulletin board that lets plants respond to changes in their environment. But the air isn't the only medium for plant messages. Underground, an entirely different form of communication takes place, one that involves roots, fungi, and chemical whispers in the dark. Through their roots, plants can release compounds into the soil to influence nearby organisms. Some of these chemicals suppress competing plants, others attract helpful microbes or warn of parasitic threats. Roots don't just dig, they interact. They probe, sense, and engage with the hidden world around them. And in many forests and ecosystems, those roots are connected by fungal networks, the so-called wood wide web. These underground systems link multiple trees and plants together via mycorrhizal fungi. These fungi form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, exchanging nutrients for sugars and forming vast interconnected webs of communication. Through these networks, trees can share resources, sending extra carbon to shaded neighbors or nourishing their own offspring. Some researchers have even observed what looks like triage, where healthy trees help sustain sick ones through these underground connections. Of course, this doesn't mean forests are behaving like conscious communities, but it does suggest a level of coordination and responsiveness that goes far beyond what we used to think plants were capable of. There's also evidence that plants use electrical signals to process information when touched, injured, or exposed to sudden changes, send slow-moving electrical impulses through their tissues, not unlike the action potentials in animal nerves, though much slower and more diffuse. One famous example is the Venus flytrap. This plant snaps shut when tiny hairs on its inner surface are touched twice in quick succession. That's not just a reflex, it's a form of counting. The plant needs confirmation before it acts, likely to avoid wasting energy on a false alarm. Within seconds, it processes the signals and makes a decision. In another example, the sensitive plant Mimosa pudica quickly folds its leaves when touched, but even more interestingly, it can learn. In controlled experiments, these plants were repeatedly exposed to a harmless stimulus, a light drop of water, for instance, which initially caused the leaves to close, but over time, the plant stopped responding. It learned that the stimulus wasn't a threat, and it retained this knowledge for weeks, even without a brain. This brings us to a difficult and fascinating question. Do plants know things? It depends, of course, on what we mean by know. Plants don't think in sentences. They don't feel emotions in the way animals do, but they do sense, evaluate, and adapt based on experience. They exhibit behaviors that in animals we might call intelligence. They detect light, gravity, moisture, temperature, pressure, and chemical gradients. They measure day length, anticipate seasonal changes, and time their flowering accordingly. They track the movement of the sun across the sky, adjusting their leaves and stems to maximize energy intake. They can even recognize kin growing differently when surrounded by relatives versus strangers. And unlike most animals, plants grow their bodies with remarkable flexibility. A tree doesn't have a fixed blueprint, it constantly adjusts, shaping its form in response to wind, light, competition, and injury. That adaptability, spread over a lifetime of decades or centuries, is its own kind of wisdom. Some scientists are exploring the idea of plant neurobiology, not because plants have neurons or brains, but because they exhibit behaviors typically associated with nervous systems. The term is controversial, and rightly so, as it risks overstating what we currently understand, but it reflects a growing recognition that plants are not simple, silent objects. They are complex organisms with unique ways of processing and responding to their environment. Even their seeds seem to show a kind of discernment. Studies suggest that seeds can detect the presence of nearby plants and alter their germination strategies accordingly. Some delay sprouting if competition is too high. Others speed up their growth to outpace rivals. These aren't random responses, they're context-sensitive strategies. It's a new way of thinking about life, not centered on movement or brains, but on responsiveness, connection, and persistence. Plants live at a different speed. Their decisions unfold slowly, often invisibly. But that doesn't mean they're unaware. Imagine the wisdom of a tree that has lived for 500 years, sensing thousands of sunrises, countless storms, generations of creatures nesting in its branches or burrowing in its roots. It may not think, but it knows the rhythms of the earth in a way no animal ever could. In the end, plant intelligence doesn't look like ours. It isn't fast, flashy, or verbal. It's slow, rooted, and deeply embedded in place. But it's there, pulsing through roots, carried on the wind, shared through the soil, written in the language of chemistry and growth. To walk through a forest is not to pass among passive things. It's to move through a living conversation, one that's been going on for millions of years in silence beneath our notice. And the more we learn to listen, the more we begin to realize. The green world is not quiet because it has nothing to say. It's quiet because it speaks in a language we've only just begun to understand. Beneath your feet right now is one of the most complex communication systems on Earth. It's not made of wires or satellites. It wasn't built by humans, and you won't find blinking lights or spinning fans. Instead, it's built from the fine, thread-like filaments of fungi weaving through soil, leaf litter, and root tips in a vast living network. Scientists call it a mycorrhizal network, others call it the Wood Wide Web. And while it may sound poetic, the comparison isn't just metaphorical. This underground network connects trees and plants in ways eerily similar to the internet, sharing information, transferring resources, and maintaining a kind of decentralized stability that keeps entire ecosystems in balance. Let's start with the basics. Fungi are not just mushrooms. In fact, the mushroom is just the fruiting body, the part we see above ground. Most of the fungal organism lives in the soil in the form of long, thin filaments called hyphae. These threads are incredibly fine, often just a few microns thick, and can stretch for meters, branching and fusing in endless patterns. When these fungal threads connect to the roots of plants, they form structures known as mycorrhizae, a term that literally means fungus root. It's a partnership that has existed for more than 400 million years. The fungi help plants absorb water and nutrients, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, from the soil. In return, the plants provide the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It's a mutually beneficial trade, one that supports over 90% of all terrestrial plants. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. These fungi don't just connect to a single plant. They often link multiple plants together, forming vast underground networks where information and resources can be passed from one organism to another. In a forest, this means that trees are not isolated individuals. They're part of a larger interconnected system, quietly communicating and sharing below the surface. A birch tree may be connected to a fir, which is connected to a spruce, which is linked to a patch of wildflowers. The entire forest, in a very real sense, is networked, and through this network, trees can share nutrients. For example, a tree in full sunlight might produce more sugars than it needs. Some of that excess energy can be passed through the fungal network to neighboring trees that are struggling in the shade or recovering from damage. This generosity isn't limited to close relatives. It can occur between different species, and it appears to follow patterns that suggest cooperation rather than competition. Some researchers have described older, larger trees as mother trees, central hubs that support seedlings and younger saplings by feeding them carbon and helping them establish root systems. It's not that the trees are being altruistic in the way humans understand kindness, but the network itself seems to encourage balance and mutual survival, a quiet economy that rewards participation and discourages isolation. And it's not just food being shared. Trees can also send chemical signals through the mycorrhizal network, warning others of threats like insect attacks or fungal infections. When one tree is wounded, neighboring trees may begin producing defensive compounds in response. It's as if the forest is whispering, "Trouble's coming, get ready." There's even evidence that plants can detect the relative health of their neighbors through these networks. If a tree is diseased or dying, surrounding plants may reduce their connections to it, conserving resources for more viable partners. It's a kind of ecological triage, not personal, but practical. Incredibly, these fungal networks can also influence plant behavior above ground. Seedlings growing in connection with the network often grow faster and stronger than those without. They're more resistant to drought, more adaptable to poor soil, and more likely to survive the harsh conditions of early growth. All of this happens without a single sound, without a pulse or a spark. It's communication via slow and astonishingly effective. But perhaps what's most striking is the scale. In some ecosystems, mycorrhizal networks stretch across entire forests. One study in Oregon discovered a single fungal organism, an Armillaria species, that covered over 2,000 acres of forest floor. It's believed to be the largest living organism on Earth by area, and it may be thousands of years old. Think about that, a single fungal network, older than many civilizations, quietly maintaining the balance of a forest by linking every tree to its neighbors, of course. This underground system is vulnerable. Soil disturbance, pollution, and the loss of biodiversity can disrupt these delicate connections. Modern agriculture, which often relies on fertilizers and monocultures, tends to bypass or damage mycorrhizal networks, replacing slow ecological cooperation with short-term chemical fixes. But in forests and diverse natural systems, the underground internet continues to function, a living legacy of ancient symbiosis. It's easy to imagine a tree as a solitary being, tall, unmoving, self-contained, but that image is incomplete. A tree is also a node in a web, a participant in a community that stretches far beyond its own canopy. And fungi, so often dismissed as mold or mushrooms, are the facilitators of that community. They are the connectors, the messengers, the architects of communication beneath the soil. So the next time you walk through a forest, consider what's happening underfoot. Every step may be crossing invisible threads of connection. The trees around you may be engaged in slow conversations, sharing sustenance, sending warnings, or nurturing their young all through a network that no one sees, but everything depends on. The Wood Wide Web is not fast, flashy, or digital, but it is old, wise, and quietly essential. A silent pulse beneath the soil, reminding us that even in stillness, there is connection from space. Earth looks like a blue marble, gleaming with oceans streaked with clouds, and wrapped in a thin veil of atmosphere. It's easy to think of it as a water planet, and in many ways it is. But what often goes unnoticed is just how crucial plants are in managing all that water. Without them, the planet's hydration would fall into chaos. Plants don't just use water. They shape where it goes, how long it stays, and in what form it moves through the environment. They are the architects of the water cycle, choreographing a global dance of evaporation, condensation, rainfall, and flow. It begins with the roots. When it rains, plants act like sponges. Their roots catch water, draw it into the soil, and slow its escape. Without plant cover, water rushes off the land quickly, eroding soil, flooding rivers, and draining aquifers faster than they can refill. But when vegetation is present, from grasses to forests, the water is captured, stored, and filtered. It's allowed to linger. Above ground, leaves play their own role. Through transpiration, plants release water vapor back into the air, a process that helps cool their tissues and adds moisture to the atmosphere. This contributes to local humidity and can even help trigger rainfall. In large ecosystems like tropical rainforests, this cycle becomes self-sustaining. Trees bring rain, and rain supports trees. But it's not just forests that do this work. Of the most powerful plant guardians of water are found in unexpected places like wetlands, swamps, and mangrove forests. Wetlands are often misunderstood, sometimes dismissed as soggy or unproductive. These ecosystems are in fact among the most valuable on Earth. They act like kidneys for the landscape, filtering water, trapping pollutants, and regulating flow. Plants like reeds, sedges, and cattails thrive in these watery environments, forming dense root mats that hold soil in place and prevent sediment from clouding rivers and lakes. Wetland plants also help absorb excess nutrients, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, from agricultural runoff. Without them, these nutrients can lead to algal blooms and oxygen-depleted dead zones in lakes and coastal waters. But the plants keep things balanced, not by any conscious effort, but simply by doing what they've evolved to do. And then there are mangroves, twisted, salt-loving trees that live where land meets sea. Mangrove forests are some of the most effective coastal defenders on the planet. Their roots rise from the mud like stilts, trapping sediments, buffering wave energy, and stabilizing shorelines. During storms and high tides, they reduce flooding and prevent erosion, protecting both ecosystems and human communities. Mangroves also support biodiversity. Their submerged roots offer shelter for fish and crustaceans, while their canopy hosts birds, insects, and reptiles. And crucially, they help sequester carbon, storing it in wood and soil at rates far higher than most terrestrial forests. High in the mountains, another kind of water guardian grows: moss. Though small and often overlooked, moss plays a huge role in water retention. It can absorb many times its own weight in water, acting as a natural reservoir during dry spells and slowly releasing moisture back into the environment. In alpine regions and peat bogs, moss helps maintain steady water flow, feeding streams and rivers long after the rain has stopped. Even deserts have their specialists. Succulent plants like cacti and agave have evolved to store water with incredible efficiency. Their waxy skins, shallow roots, and compact forms are all adaptations to conserve every drop, and in some arid landscapes, hardy shrubs and grasses anchor the soil, reducing evaporation and holding on to moisture just beneath the surface. All these systems, from steamy jungles to salty coasts to alpine moss mats, are part of a planetary network of water regulation. Plants are not passive participants. They are managers, regulators, and buffers. They slow the flow, filter the drops, and build the conditions for life to flourish. In many regions, deforestation and habitat loss have disrupted this balance. When trees are cut and wetlands drained, water loses its guides, floods become more severe, droughts more frequent, soils erode, rivers dry out, then rage uncontrollably when the rains return. But when we restore plant life, reforesting hillsides, rebuilding wetlands, replanting mangroves, we see the water return to its rhythm. Rainfall patterns stabilize, groundwater replenishes, the land becomes spongy again, able to breathe and hold. One of the most elegant examples of this is the process of cloud formation over forests. As trees transpire, they release not just water vapor, but also volatile organic compound steiny molecules that can seed cloud formation. These clouds reflect sunlight, moderate temperature, and bring rain. It's a subtle feedback loop. Trees help make clouds, and clouds help nourish trees. Even on a small scale, the presence of vegetation can make a measurable difference. Urban areas with more trees experience lower temperatures, reduced runoff, and improved air quality. Green roofs, rain gardens, and parklands are more than just pretty features. They're part of a city's hydrological health. And of course, plants make water drinkable. Not directly perhaps, but through filtration and purification. As water moves through soil held in place by roots, impurities are removed. By the time it reaches streams or aquifers, it's cleaner, cooler, and safer. In this way, plants are not just scenery, they are infrastructure. And unlike concrete dams or metal pipes, they repair themselves, adapt to change, and support life at every scale. We often think of Earth as the water planet because of its oceans, but the drinkable, usable water, the water we need for survival, depends on plants. They don't just decorate the landscape, they define it, and they protect its most precious resource. Even the tiniest leaf plays a part. In its cells, water is taken up, used, and released. Across entire canopies, rivers of vapor rise invisibly into the sky. Through every root, drop by drop, the earth hydrates itself. It's a quiet miracle of design, a system that works because it is shared. And in the stillness of wetlands, the rustle of reeds, or the slow drip of a mossy forest, we can see just how deeply water and plant life are entwined. Without plants, the world would still have water, but it would not know how to hold it. It would flood and dry, surge and vanish unmeasured and unsustained. But with plants, water finds its rhythm. It pauses, soaks, filters, and flows, and in that rhythm, life finds a place to grow. When we think of plants, we tend to picture lush forests, rolling meadows, or backyard gardens, rooted, leafy, and green. But some of Earth's most important photosynthesizers float freely in the sea, invisible to the naked eye, and vastly underappreciated. These are the algae, the silent workers of the biosphere, quietly keeping our planet alive. Algae are an incredibly diverse group. Some are single-celled and microscopic, drifting through ocean currents as plankton. Others form towering underwater forests like kelp, stretching tens of meters toward the sunlight. And though they may look nothing like a tree or a flower, algae perform the same core magic trick. They turn sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into energy and release oxygen in the process. In fact, algae are responsible for producing more than half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. Every second breath you take can be traced back not to a rainforest or woodland, but to a drifting cloud of phytoplankton in the ocean. They are the lungs of the sea and of the planet. Phytoplankton, the microscopic algae that inhabit the sunlit layers of oceans and fresh water, are the base of the marine food web. They're eaten by tiny animals called zooplankton, which are eaten by small fish, which are eaten by larger fish, and so on all the way up to whales and seabirds. If you follow the food chain backward in the ocean, it usually ends in a cloud of algae. These minute organisms drift with the currents, blooming in great pulses wherever nutrients and light are abundant. From space, these blooms appear as swirling, turquoise patterns in the water, a sign of thriving productivity. They may live for only a few days, but they photosynthesize constantly, pumping out oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide. And when they die, many sink to the ocean floor, locking away that carbon in deep sediments for millennia. This process, carbon capture by plankton, is one of the planet's most important long-term climate stabilizers. It's part of what scientists call the biological pump. In a quiet, elegant way, algae help regulate the atmosphere, reduce greenhouse gases, and cool the planet all without roots, leaves, or any noise at all. But not all algae float aimlessly. Take kelp for example. These large brown algae anchor themselves to the ocean floor and grow upward like underwater trees. In places like the Pacific coast of North America, kelp forests form vast, dense underwater canopies, swaying in the current and teeming with life. Otters, sea urchins, fish, crabs, and seals all make their home among the fronds. Kelp grows at astonishing rates, up to 0.5 meter per day under the right conditions. It doesn't need soil, just light and nutrient-rich water. And like other algae, it photosynthesizes, capturing sunlight and transforming it into biomass that feeds entire ecosystems. Some species of algae even live in extreme environments, hot springs, Arctic ice, or salty deserts. Others, like the green algae chlorella, are being studied as potential future food sources or even as fuel, thanks to their rapid growth and high lipid content. In recent years, algae-based biofuels and dietary supplements have moved from the fringes of science into real-world applications, offering a sustainable option for both energy and nutrition. Algae have also had a long and unusual partnership with corals. Inside the tissues of most reef-building corals live tiny photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae. These algae provide the coral with food, and in return the coral offers them shelter and access to sunlight. This partnership is what allows coral reefs to flourish in nutrient-poor tropical waters. But when water becomes too warm or polluted, the coral expels the algae, leading to bleaching, starvation, and eventually death. It's a delicate alliance, and one that highlights how even microscopic life can tip the balance of an entire ecosystem, despite their importance. Algae are often invisible in our daily lives. They don't bloom in gardens or rustle in the wind, but they are in toothpaste, ice cream, and salad dressings. Compounds extracted from red and brown algae are used as thickeners and stabilizers in all sorts of everyday products. Spirulina, a blue-green algae, is sold in health food stores as a protein-rich superfood. They've even been used to clean wastewater and capture pollutants from industrial runoff. Certain algae can absorb heavy metals and toxins from contaminated water, acting as natural biofilters. In the right settings, they can purify water, remove excess nitrogen, and restore balance to damaged ecosystems. But like all delicate systems, algae are vulnerable to disruption. Nutrient pollution, especially from agriculture, can cause harmful algal blooms that produce toxins and deplete oxygen in the water, creating dead zones where nothing can survive. Climate change also threatens to shift the delicate balance of oceanic ecosystems, altering currents, changing temperatures, and stressing the algae that so many organisms rely on. Still, for all their fragility, algae remain astonishingly resilient. They've been around for billions of years, among the first organisms to photosynthesize. Long before trees, flowers, or ferns, the oceans shimmered with their emerald light. They are ancient, adaptable, and astonishingly efficient. And perhaps that's their quiet brilliance. They don't need roots, petals, or bark. They don't shout for attention. They simply exist, floating in silence, turning sunlight into breath, and feeding a world that barely notices them. So the next time you hear the word algae, don't picture pond scum or a slippery rock. Picture a microscopic cell hanging in the light, spinning carbon into sugar and filling the sky with oxygen. Picture an underwater forest waving gently with the tide, harboring life in every fold. Picture a quiet, unseen, force ancient, tireless, and essential. In the vast library of Earth's living systems, algae may be the smallest entries, but they're among the most powerful authors. Not all battles are loud. In the plant world, survival is often a quiet chemistry lesson written in pigments, perfumes, and poisons. Without claws or teeth, or the ability to flee, plants have developed an astonishing array of defenses and lures, many of them tucked inside Molecules invisible to the eye. Color, for starters, isn't just decoration, it's strategy. Petals bloom in brilliant hues, not because they enjoy the attention, but because they're communicating with bees, birds, and butterflies. Red, blue, yellow, ultraviolet. These colors act like neon signs, guiding pollinators toward nectar in exchange for a bit of pollen transport. These pigments, anthocyanins, carotenoids, and flavonoids, do more than just paint petals. In leaves, they help regulate light absorption and protect cells from damage. In fruit, they attract animals to eat and spread seeds. And in some plants, they shift with the seasons or the soil, a natural palette adapting to conditions. But color can also conceal. Some plants wear camouflage, blending into the background to avoid detection by herbivores. Leafy greens mimic the shapes and textures of their surroundings. Certain orchids resemble dead leaves. Others mimic stones or sticks, using shape and shading to disappear entirely. It's the botanical version of stealth. No cloaks required. Still, color and camouflage are only the surface. Beneath them lies chemistry. Plants are master alchemists, brewing molecules that can nourish, repel, seduce, or sicken, sometimes all at once. Take capsaicin, the spicy compound, in chili peppers. It's not there to entertain your taste buds. It's a deterrent designed to keep mammals from nibbling the fruit. Birds, however, aren't affected by the burn. So, they eat the fruit and disperse the seeds, just as the plant intended. It's a carefully tuned evolutionary deal. Pain for one creature, passage for another. Other defenses are more direct. Some plants produce alkaloids, bitter, often toxic compounds that interfere with animal physiology. Caffeine and nicotine, for instance, are natural pesticides. They overstimulate or paralyze insects that try to feed on the leaves. Humans, of course, have developed a curious fondness for these same compounds, but that's beside the plant's point. Then there's the milkweed, which produces cardiac glycosides, a class of toxins that can stop a heart. Monarch butterfly caterpillars have evolved to tolerate these poisons, and in doing so gain protection themselves. Birds learn not to eat monarchs, associating their bold orange pattern with a very unpleasant aftertaste. It's a chain of chemical warfare that spans species. Plants can also signal distress chemically. When a tomato plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases airborne compounds, warning its neighbors of the invasion. Those neighbors, in turn, ramp up their own defenses, producing bitter compounds or toughening their leaves. Some even attract the caterpillar's predators, like wasps, to help with pest control. It's not consciousness, but it is responsive reactive intelligence written in molecules. And then there are the truly strange chemistries. Some plants produce neurotoxins, like the castor bean's ricin or the hemlock's conine, molecules so potent they can be fatal in tiny doses. Others, like the stinging nettle, deliver mechanical irritation. Tiny hairs inject histamines and acids into the skin, causing that familiar sting and itch. But chemistry isn't just about defense, it's also about persuasion. Sweetness, for instance, is a chemical invitation. Sugars lure animals to eat fruit, carrying seeds to new locations. The shape, color, and scent of a ripe mango or blueberry isn't random. It's marketing carefully engineered by millions of years of evolution to appeal to hungry allies. Scents are chemical messages, too. A jasmine flower releases volatile molecules that drift on the air, catching the attention of nighttime moths. A fig tree emits signals that attract specific wasps to pollinate its hidden blossoms. And when grass is cut, it releases compounds that smell fresh and green to us. But to the plant, it's more like a siren wail, warning others of injury. Even taste can be a signal. Some bitter flavors are a warning sign of toxins. Others, like the astringency in unripe fruit, are a cue to wake. Tannins in tea leaves, grapes, and bark produce a dry, puckering sensation, another form of not yet or not for you. Once ripe or properly processed, those same chemicals can become flavorful and desirable. In forests, these compounds shape entire ecosystems. Deer avoid certain shrubs. Insects seek specific flowers. Soil microbes break down leaf litter rich in phenolics and acids. Everything depends on this subtle dance of chemistry. Who eats what, who avoids what, and who benefits from the transaction. Humans, of course, have become skilled at tapping into this chemical lexicon. We use plant pigments to dye fabrics. We ferment sugars into alcohol. We distill essential oils for perfume, medicine, or spiritual rituals. We extract painkillers from bark and flavors from seeds. Vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloval are gifts from the plant kingdom's chemical arsenal. and we've learned to respect the dangerous ones. The foxglove, for instance, produces digitalis, a compound that can stop or regulate a heartbeat, depending on the dose. In large quantities, it's lethal. In precise amounts, it's life-saving. It's a reminder that nature's pharmacy doesn't label its bottles. It offers both cure and curse in the same breath. All of this, the color, the fragrance, the toxins, the camouflage, serves one central purpose: survival. Plants can't run. They can't hide in the usual sense. But they can outsmart, outlast, and outmaneuver their challenges using chemistry as their tool. And what's more, they do it beautifully. A poison can be housed in a delicate blossom. A defense can double as desert. A camouflage leaf can flutter like art in the breeze. In the world of plants, beauty is never just for show. It is function, strategy, and chemistry combined. It is evolution's quiet signature, written not in roars or claws, but in pigments, poisons, and perfume. Not all plants are content with photosynthesis and peaceful sunshine. Some are mischief makers, some are tricksters, some are downright monstrous. In the quiet, leafy world of plants, there are outliers that behave more like animals than flowers, capturing prey, stealing nutrients, or pretending to be something they're not. These are the botanical oddities, the green weirdos that refuse to play by the rules. Let's start with the ones that eat meat. Carnivorous plants may seem like something out of a fantasy novel, but they're very real and surprisingly common in nutrient-poor environments like bogs and wetlands. In places where the soil is too acidic or lacking in nitrogen, some plants have evolved a different strategy. They get their nutrients from animals. The Venus flytrap is perhaps the most famous example. Native to the Carolinas in the United States, this plant looks like something with teeth. And in a way, it acts like it. Its modified leaves are hinged open like tiny jaws, lined with sensitive trigger hairs. When an unsuspecting insect lands and touches two hairs in quick succession, the trap snaps shut, the leaf edges seal, digestive enzymes are released, and over the course of several days, the plant slowly absorbs the nutrients from its prey. Then it reopens, ready for the next victim. The bladderwort is another carnivorous marvel. It lives in water and has tiny bladder-like traps under its surface, each equipped with a vacuum mechanism. When a microscopic organism brushes the trigger hairs near the trap's entrance, the bladder snaps open and sucks in water, along with the unlucky prey. It's one of the fastest movements in the plant kingdom, taking less than a millisecond. And there's the pitcher plant, a variety of species found all over the world. These plants form tubular leaves filled with liquid. Insects are drawn in by nectar and scent, but once they slip inside, downward-facing hairs and slippery walls make escape nearly impossible. The prey drowns in the fluid, and the plant digests it at leisure. Some pitcher plants even harbor entire ecosystems within their pitchers: frogs, mosquito, larvae, and bacteria, all coexisting in a miniature carnivorous world. But eating animals isn't the only strange thing a plant can do. Some plants are parasites. Take Rafflesia, the largest flower in the world, a bloom over 1 meter wide. This plant doesn't have leaves, stems, or roots of its own. It lives entirely inside the tissue of a host vine, emerging only to bloom. The flower smells like rotting flesh, attracting flies for pollination. It's beautiful in a grotesque kind of way, a floral imposter of a decaying animal. Dodder is another parasitic plant, sometimes called witch's hair. It looks like a bundle of orange spaghetti draped over its victims. It has no chlorophyll of its own and instead taps into the stems of other plants with specialized structures, called hostoria, stealing water and nutrients. It can even sense chemical signals from nearby plants and grow toward them as if sniffing out its next meal. Then there are the mimics, plants that pretend to be something else entirely. Some orchids have evolved flowers that look and even smell like female insects. Male bees or wasps try to mate with the flower, only to fly away covered in pollen. It's pollination by deception, a botanical con job. Others disguise themselves. For protection, the Bocchella trifoliolata, a vine native to Chile, can actually change the shape of its leaves to mimic the plant it's growing on, even if that plant is completely unrelated. It's like botanical shifting. Scientists still aren't entirely sure how it's done, but it may involve sensing airborne chemicals from neighboring leaves and adjusting its own growth accordingly. Some plants move in ways that seem almost animal. The Mimosa pudica, or sensitive plant, folds its leaves inward at the lightest touch. It's a defense mechanism, possibly to startle herbivores or reduce surface area during rain. Watching it react feels more like watching a creature than a plant. It's fast, reactive, and oddly expressive. And let's not forget about smell. not all of it pleasant. While many plants emit lovely floral scents to attract pollinators, others opt for something a little more pungent. The corpse flower, Titanum, is notorious for its stench, often compared to rotting meat, dirty socks, or a garbage bin in midsummer. The smell attracts carrion beetles and flies, which help pollinate the enormous bloom. The flower only opens for a brief window, and when it does, it heats up to spread its odor even further. Skunk cabbage uses a similar trick. Found in wet woodlands, this plant actually generates its own heat, melting surrounding snow and releasing a strong, skunky scent to draw in early pollinators. It's one of the first plants to bloom in spring, sometimes before the snow has even melted. In the deserts, oddities take on even stranger forms. The welwitschia plant of Namibia consists of just 2 leaves, but they grow continuously, curling and fraying into ribbons over centuries. Some specimens are estimated to be over 1,000 years old. Despite its alien appearance, it survives intense heat and dryness by absorbing moisture from fog through its leaves. In the tropics, you might find the walking palm, a tree that appears to move over time. While it doesn't actually walk, it grows new roots in the direction of sunlight and lets old ones die off, giving the impression of slow, deliberate motion. From traps and poisons to mimicry and motion, the plant kingdom has no shortage of strangeness. It's a reminder that survival doesn't require aggression, just creativity. These plants have evolved elaborate strategies not out of malice, but necessity. They are solutions to environmental puzzles, strange answers to the same ancient question: how to grow, how to thrive, how to pass on life. And while they may seem bizarre, these green misfits fit perfectly into the grand design of ecosystems. They pollinate, feed, and protect. They shape the behavior of animals and even influence human culture. Some are revered, some are feared, and some are just quietly fascinating. In every habitat, tucked behind the familiar ferns and flowers, are plants that defy expectations, that bend the rules of biology, and show us just how inventive evolution can be. They may not make a sound, but they make a statement. In the world of plants, weird works. Before cities, before writing, before even the wheel, there were plants. It's a quiet truth often lost beneath the noise of history. But long before civilization emerged, it was plants that paved the way. They provided not just food, but structure, meaning, and rhythm. Without them, human society would never have taken root. The story begins over 10,000 years ago, when small groups of humans began to settle near fertile river valleys. Until then, life had been nomadic, following game, foraging wild plants, moving with the seasons. But somewhere along the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, and the Indus, a shift began. People started planting seeds. Grains were among the first: barley and wheat in the Middle East, rice in China, maize in the Americas. Tubers like yams and potatoes followed. These crops didn't just feed more people. They changed the way humans lived. Permanent homes replaced temporary shelters. Food could be stored, traded, and taxed. Villages grew into towns, and towns into cities. Plants became infrastructure. With agriculture came surplus, and with surplus came specialization. People who didn't have to farm could become toolmakers, builders, priests, and scribes. Entire societies bloomed from this shift, and at the center of it all, often quite literally, was the garden, the cultivated plot, the sown field, the grove of olive trees. Plants became symbols of wealth, stability, and sacred order. Some plants were elevated beyond food. Trees, in particular, took on spiritual and cultural roles. In ancient Mesopotamia, the tree of life was a symbol of divine connection. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil, the world tree, connected the heavens, earth, and underworld. In Hinduism, the banyan is associated with immortality and wisdom, and in Christianity, a tree sits at the heart of Eden. The reverence for trees was more than poetic. These towering organisms, with their deep roots and far-reaching branches, mirrored cosmic ideas: life, death, rebirth, and knowledge. To ancient people, the tree was both shelter and metaphor. Its fruit could nourish, its wood could warm, its form could inspire. In nearly every culture, trees appear in creation stories, sacred texts, and seasonal rituals. Flowers, too, became part of the human story, not just as decorations, but as symbols. The lotus flower in Egypt represented rebirth, rising each day from the muddy waters of the Nile. In Japan, the cherry blossom came to represent the fleeting beauty of life. Roses in Persia were tied to love and divine beauty. In Victorian England, entire messages could be sent through bouquets, silent language of petals and leaves. Plants entered myth, medicine, and meaning. Shamans and healers studied them. Kings and conquerors hoarded rare specimens. Philosophers pondered their growth. Poets compared them to hearts, thoughts, and souls. Even today, we still use floral metaphors in daily speech. Ideas take root, love blooms, and hope is evergreen. But plants didn't just shape minds, they shaped landscapes. Rice terraces carved into hillsides, cornfields stretching across plains, olive orchards lining Mediterranean coasts. Humans became ecological engineers, changing soil, water, and climate to suit their crops. In doing so, we invited plants to evolve with us. Domesticated species slowly changed. Wild teosinte became modern maize. Tiny bitter almonds were bred into sweet varieties. Apples became larger, juicier, more colorful. Over generations, plants adapted to human needs and preferences, and in turn we built our diets, rituals, and identities around them. Some plants fueled economies and empires. Cotton clothed nations. Sugar shaped trade routes and human history. Tea spurred revolutions and colonial expansion. Tobacco altered global consumption. Spices, once worth more than gold, drove exploration, conquest, and cultural exchange. All of it rooted in the green world. Others became markers of power. In ancient Egypt, papyrus was not just paper but a symbol of civilization itself. In Renaissance Europe, tulip bulbs sparked financial madness. In modern times, massive greenhouses and botanical gardens showcased imperial wealth and scientific curiosity, places where plants were catalogued, studied, and sometimes exploited. Still, not all relationships with plants were so grand. For many, the connection remained personal and immediate. A patch of herbs in a window box, a vine climbing, a courtyard wall, a sacred grove where no trees were to be cut. In monasteries, monks tended gardens for food and healing. In villages, festivals marked planting and harvest. Seasons were measured in blossoms and fruit. This rhythm of planting, tending, and reaping infused culture with time. Calendars were built around it, holidays celebrated it, songs and stories arose from it. Plants became companions in the human journey, shaping us as we shaped them. Even in urban centers today, remnants of this bond persist. Parks and trees soften concrete, jungles houseplants bring calm into chaotic lives. Rooftop gardens and community plots reconnect city dwellers with something older than pavement. There's a reason we feel better near greenery. We evolved beside it. And as science deepens our understanding, we're rediscovering what ancient people sensed intuitively, that plants are not just background, not just scenery, they are co-creators of culture. Civilizations didn't just rise because of agriculture. They are agriculture in countless ways. Our laws, our stories, our economies, even our religions all bear the fingerprints of leaves and roots. We have worshipped plants, traded them, shaped them, and depended on them. In return, they fed us, clothed us, cured us, and inspired us. The human story is a plant story. To understand one, you must look to the other. And when you do, you find that the very idea of civilization, of settled life, shared meaning, and growth may owe its deepest debt not to kings or wars or inventions, but to seeds sown in fertile soil and the quiet green world that sprouted from them. Imagine waking up one morning to a planet utterly unchanged at first glance. The sky is still blue, the oceans still lap against their shores, but something is missing. Not just a tree or two, not just a few flowers here and there. All plants have vanished. No rustle of leaves, no mossy scent after rain, no green. At first, you might not notice much. Maybe it's autumn, and things were looking a little bare already. But within hours, the consequences begin to quietly unfurl. The atmosphere starts to shift, the balance begins to tip, and soon, the illusion of normalcy collapses. Let's wander gently through this speculative version of Earth, not to frighten, but to better appreciate just how profoundly plants sustain life. First, the air. It feels the same for now, but the process of photosynthesis, the one that steadily replenishes our oxygen, has stopped. Most of the planet's oxygen is made by microscopic phytoplankton and land plants. Without them, there is no new oxygen entering the system. The oxygen we do have, it'll last a while, decades, perhaps even a century or two, depending on how many living things are still around to consume it. But it's a countdown now. A quiet clock has begun ticking. Next, the food. That part becomes obvious very quickly. Without plants, the entire base of nearly every food chain disappears. Herbivores begin to starve everything from deer to elephants to insects, and the carnivores, they're not far behind. After all, most predators depend on prey that depend on plants. A lion cannot eat grass, but it eats antelope that do. The oceans follow a similar path. Phytoplankton, tiny plant-like organisms, form the foundation of marine ecosystems. They photosynthesize, feed zooplankton, and help regulate the ocean's carbon balance. Without them, the marine food web collapses. Fish populations plummet. Whales, seals, seabirds all spiral into decline. The ocean becomes quieter, dimmer, less alive. For humans, the impact would be swift and surreal. Grocery stores empty in days. There's no bread, no fruit, no vegetables, no coffee, no chocolate. Even meat and dairy vanish because livestock rely on plant feed. What's left? A few artificial stores of processed food, some canned, some frozen, but those are finite. Humanity, once fed by wheat fields and rice paddies, suddenly faces a famine, unlike any in history, and it's not just food that disappears. Our medicines, many derived from plants, become scarce. There's no more aspirin from willow bark, no morphine from poppies, no quinine from cinchona trees. Many modern drugs are based on plant compounds or discovered thanks to them. Our pharmacies thin out as surely as our fields. Textiles follow, no more cotton, linen, or flax. Paper becomes a relic, wood, which built our homes, tools, and furniture for millennia, is now irreplaceable. Civilization begins to feel more fragile. We notice how much was made directly or indirectly from plant life. The temperature begins to rise, not just socially, but globally. Without forests and vegetation to regulate the climate, Earth begins to warm. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and release water vapor, helping to cool and moisten the atmosphere. Without them, greenhouse gases accumulate. The land dries, deserts creep outward, rain becomes unpredictable, and clouds less frequent. The air turns stale. Soil, without roots to hold it together, begins to blow away. Erosion accelerates. The fertile crust that took millions of years to form is swept up in the wind and washed away by rain. Rivers fill with mud. Lakes clog with silt. Agriculture, even if it had a chance, becomes impossible. The very ground is unraveling, and yet, in this strange, plantless world, a few things might persist for a time. Fungi, for instance, would enjoy a brief golden age, decomposing the vast biomass left behind. Mushrooms might sprout from decaying trunks. Bacteria too would thrive in certain niches, breaking down organic material, cycling nitrogen, but even these organisms would eventually falter without the plants that supported their ecosystems. Would humans survive? Not for long, at least. Not as we are now. Underground bunkers, hydroponic labs, synthetic food systems, they might offer brief pockets of refuge. Some might engineer algae substitutes or recycle oxygen through machines. But the scale required is staggering. It would be survival, not living. Psychologically, the world would feel uncanny. No more rustling leaves, no bird song, most birds gone with the insects and seeds, no flowers blooming in spring, no autumn blaze of color, no grass underfoot. The world would look increasingly barren, as if drained of emotion. There's also the aesthetic loss, the disappearance of beauty. Plants don't just sustain our bodies, they nurture our spirits. Gardens calm us, forests ground us. A single flower on a windowsill brings comfort. Without that gentle green presence, the world feels harsher, more mechanical, more final. Yet, even in this dark thought experiment, there's something grounding. By imagining a world without plants, we see more clearly the world we do have. Every tree becomes a miracle of engineering. Every sprout a minor rebellion against entropy. Every bloom a reminder that Earth still breathes. In a way, this scenario isn't just speculative, it's cautionary. Because while plants haven't vanished, they are vanishing in places. Deforestation, habitat loss, climate change, these aren't abstract ideas. They are quiet steps toward the world we just imagined. But they're not destiny. Unlike our fictional mourning of sudden disappearance, the real world offers time, choices, the ability to replant, to preserve, to reimagine our relationship with the green life that makes our own possible. A world without plants would be a world without breath, without balance, without beauty. But we don't live in that world. Not yet. Look out the window. There's still green. There's still time. And perhaps the most humbling truth of all is this. The survival of the most intelligent species on Earth is still tied, day by day, to the quiet work of leaves out among the stars. where no rain falls and no wind stirs the leaves. Humanity has begun a quiet experiment. We're trying to grow plants in space. It might seem like science fiction, the image of a lettuce leaf floating gently in microgravity or a tomato growing beside a window looking out onto the curve of the Earth. But it's real, and it's more than just a curiosity. Our future among the stars might hinge on whether we can take a little green with us. For as long as humans have imagined space travel, we've also wondered what we'd eat once we got there. Early space missions packed only the essentials: tubes of food, freeze-dried meals, carefully balanced nutrition in compact form. But as trips extended from days to months, and now to plans for years-long journeys to the Moon and Mars, food has become more than fuel. It's about morale, sustainability, and survival. Enter the humble plant. Growing crops in space isn't as simple as placing a pot on a windowsill. There's no gravity to guide roots downward or stems upward. Water doesn't trickle through soil, it floats and forms droplets. And sunlight, filtered through spacecraft windows or replaced by artificial LEDs, must be carefully balanced in wavelength and intensity. Despite all this, we've made remarkable progress. On the International Space Station ISS, astronauts have successfully grown lettuce, mustard, radishes, and even zinnias flowers just for beauty. NASA's Veggie experiment, with its glowing purple and green lights, was the first American fresh food production system in low Earth orbit. When the first leaves of lettuce were harvested and eaten in 2015, it marked a quiet but extraordinary milestone. These plants weren't just growing, they were thriving. Their roots adapted to hydroponic systems that wick water through spongy mats. Their leaves responded to light sources engineered to mimic the sun, and when astronauts tasted those crisp greens, they described something missing for months: freshness. It wasn't just a salad, it was a connection to Earth. Plants in space serve many roles. They provide nutrition, of course, leafy greens rich in vitamins that degrade in stored food over time, but they also recycle air, converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. They help purify water in closed systems, and perhaps most subtly, they offer psychological comfort. A living plant in the corner of a sterile module can remind a person that life continues, that something is growing quietly and gently even in the vast stillness of space. Looking ahead, space agencies around the world are experimenting with more robust crop systems, lunar greenhouses, Mars gardens, inflatable plant chambers. They're all in various stages of design and testing. One fascinating breakthrough came when Chinese scientists grew cotton on the far side of the Moon, briefly, before temperature swings ended the experiment. It marked the first time any plant sprouted on the Moon's surface, and it hinted at what might one day be possible. But for space farming to truly work, we'll need more than just individual sprouts. We'll need ecosystems, closed loops where waste becomes resource, where microbes help roots absorb nutrients, where humidity is recycled. These self-sustaining biospheres are still experimental, but they echo Earth's own systems. After all, our planet is the ultimate closed-loop system, perfected over billions of years. On Mars, the challenges grow. Lower gravity, freezing temperatures, high radiation, and soil-rich and toxic perchlorates make farming difficult, but not impossible. Scientists have simulated Martian soil using volcanic ash and experimented with growing potatoes, peas, and carrots in controlled environments. The dream isn't just to survive, but to create a kind of interplanetary garden, one adapted to alien conditions, yet familiar enough to keep us rooted. And this isn't only about astronauts or colonies on distant planets. The technologies developed for space farming, water efficiency, vertical growing systems, energy-smart lighting are already influencing Earth-based agriculture. In places where soil is poor or water is scarce, these innovations could help feed more people with less environmental impact. In this way, plants become bridges between worlds, between science and sustainability, between home and the unknown. They are more than passengers on our spacefaring journey. They are partners. They remind us that we're not meant to go it alone, that our success in the cosmos will depend not just on machines, but on life itself: chlorophyll, roots, blossoms, and seeds. There's something poetic about that in order to leave Earth we must first understand what makes it livable, that the key to surviving on other worlds might be hidden in the quiet miracle of a sprouting seed, that even amid stars, we remain bound to the green world that made us. So, as we dream of rockets and rovers and distant red planets, perhaps it's worth remembering, wherever humans go, a leaf may follow, and with it, a piece of home. If you had to describe what a plant is doing Right now, you might be tempted to say, nothing. It just sits there, green, silent, unmoving. But in truth, plants are in constant motion, just on a schedule so different from ours that we usually miss it entirely. Plants live on plant timer rhythm measured not in seconds or minutes, but in hours, days, seasons, even centuries. Their lives unfold in slow motion. And if we could only tune in, we'd see a world pulsing with activity. That'd start with something as simple as the sunrise. Long before your eyes even open, plants have already begun adjusting to the incoming light. Deep in their cells, tiny molecular clocks tick quietly. These circadian rhythms, 24-hour cycles similar to our own, allow plants to anticipate dawn, not just react to it. As the first rays hit their leaves, they start ramping up photosynthesis, opening their stomata and preparing to make food. They don't wait to be told by the sun, they already know it's coming. This built-in awareness of time is remarkably sophisticated. Some flowers open and close at specific times of day, like botanical clocks. Morning glories stretch wide in the early light, evening primroses bloom just as the sun dips low. Even in constant darkness, plants keep ticking, proof that their rhythms are internal, not just responses to the world around them. Then there's seasonal time. Plants read the year as clearly as we read a calendar. They know when to bloom, when to drop leaves, when to lie dormant. They measure the length of nights to determine the changing seasons, a process called photoperiodism, and they don't guess. A cherry blossom tree knows exactly how many cold days it has endured before it dares to bud. It's not just temperature, it's history. And it's not just annual plants or trees with calendar sensibilities. Even seeds possess a strange patience. Some wait years, even centuries, for the right moment. The oldest known viable seed ever sprouted was over 2,000 years old, a date palm uncovered from an ancient fortress in Israel. For 20 centuries, it waited. Then, in the warmth of soil and light, it unfurled like nothing had happened. Plant time also teaches persistence. Think of bristlecone pines, some over 5,000 years old, still clinging to rocky slopes, or the creosote bush, which clones itself slowly across desert sands, forming a single organism nearly 12,000 years old. These aren't just survivors, they're time travelers. Each leaf, each ring, is a record of seasons and storms and sunrises. We live in a world obsessed with speed. We refresh our phones, race deadlines, binge-watch in hours what took years to make, but plants move at the speed of soil and sunlight. Their growth is quiet but relentless. Given enough time, they crack concrete. They turn bare stone into lush forest. They teach us that transformation need not be instant to be powerful. Even their internal chemistry follows patient rhythms. The opening and closing of stomata, the shifting of chloroplasts, the curling of tendrils all happen with exquisite timing. A vine reaching for light moves too slowly for the naked eye to detect, but speed it up in a time-lapse, and you'll see a kind of botanical ballet. Leaves tracking the sun like satellite dishes, flowers blooming with a dancer's grace. This slowness isn't a flaw, it's a different form of intelligence, one tuned to cycles older than civilization. Plants sync themselves with the moon, the tides, the shifting axis of the earth, and in doing so they offer a kind of wisdom. Not all knowing is fast. Not all awareness is loud. Researchers have even studied the ways plants respond to recurring patterns. In experiments, some plants have learned to anticipate a drop in temperature or the arrival of water at regular intervals. They adjust accordingly, proof that memory, or at least something very much like it, may exist in roots and leaves. And yet, in their stillness, plants also act as mirrors. When you sit beneath a tree, or tend a garden, or even just stare at a houseplant long enough, something in you slows down, too. You match their tempo. You remember to breathe. You become more aware of light, warmth, scent, the whisper of a breeze. Their presence draws your attention to what is happening right now, not on a screen, but in the moment. Maybe that's why people talk to their plants. It's not just because we hope it helps them grow, although to some degree it might. It's because plants make good listeners. They don't rush us, they don't interrupt, they simply are. And in their presence we remember that being alive doesn't always mean doing something. Sometimes it just means existing with grace, rooted in place, tuned to the long rhythm of the earth. There's something comforting about that. In a world that rushes forward, plants remind us that not all progress is visible, that growth can happen quietly. That time, if listened to carefully, has many speeds. And in their gentle slowness they offer us the oldest invitation of all, to slow down, breathe deep, and grow. Somewhere right now, in a high-tech greenhouse stacked 20 feet high, Lettuce is growing under pink LED lights, not far away, in a lab, so clean it hums. Scientists are editing the DNA of a rice plant to make it more drought-resistant, and in a windswept mountain valley, volunteers are gently pressing tree seedlings into the earth, one by one, trying to rebuild what was lost. This is the future of green. Not just one path forward, but many, all rooted in the same idea, that plants still hold the key to human survival. Let's start with the forests. Across the world, deforestation has stripped away vast ecosystems, reducing biodiversity and releasing enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. But alongside that loss, a counter-movement has quietly grown: reforestation. In countries from Brazil to Bhutan, people are planting trees by the millions. In Ethiopia, a single campaign planted more than 300 million trees in one day. These efforts can't replace old-growth forests, but they're a step toward healing, carbon capture, and climate resilience. Some projects go further, combining reforestation with science. Drones drop seed pods over barren land, each one designed to germinate on impact. Satellite-guided planting maps optimize where and how to restore forests. Mycorrhizal fungi are added to soil to help young roots take hold and flourish. The ancient partnership between plants and fungi is now getting a 21st century upgrade, but trees alone aren't enough. Humanity's relationship with plants is changing faster than ever before. Global food demand is rising, and with it, pressure. On agricultural land, enter vertical farms, towering stacks of hydroponic crops grown in repurposed warehouses, abandoned malls, even shipping containers. These farms use up to 95% less water, eliminate the need for pesticides, and can grow food year-round regardless of weather. In cities where space is tight and fresh produce is scarce, this isn't just clever, it's revolutionary. At the same time, biotechnology is transforming the green world at the genetic level. CRISPR, the precision gene editing tool, allows scientists to tweak a plant's DNA with surgical accuracy. Crops can be made more nutritious, more resilient, more efficient. Tomatoes that don't bruise, bananas that resist deadly fungi, wheat that thrives in salty soil. This kind of editing isn't about splicing fish genes into strawberries anymore. It's about fine-tuning nature, accelerating the adaptations that once took centuries to emerge. Some see it as a vital tool in the fight against hunger and climate change. Others worry about unintended consequences, corporate control, and the speed at which we're reshaping life. The future of plants also includes rediscovery. For every species we've domesticated, there are thousands more that could become food, medicine, or building material. Breadfruit, moringa, amaranth, and shunt, crops with modern potential. Scientists are scouring rainforests and deserts for plants that thrive under extreme conditions, hoping to unlock traits that could future-proof global agriculture. Even in space, the search continues. On the Moon, on Mars, in orbit, wherever humans go, we'll need plants. The closed-loop biospheres being designed for distant planets may one day also help us build more sustainable systems on Earth. What we learn about growing food in a spaceship might help feed cities on a warming planet. But with all this progress, a quieter revolution is underway, rethinking how we relate to plants, not just as resources, but as partners. In many indigenous traditions, plants are not objects, they are beings, teachers, relatives. The Haudani Thanksgiving address begins by acknowledging the plants and trees for their gifts. In Japan, some people still say a short phrase before cutting a flower, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. These ways of thinking aren't outdated. They might be essential, because the future of green isn't just about technology, it's about humility. As climate change accelerates, many of our problems trace back to forgetting the limits of what plants can do and what we've asked of them. We've cleared too much, farmed too heavily, relied on too few species. The banana you eat today, the Cavendish, is a genetic clone of millions of others. One fungus could wipe it out. Our food systems are efficient but fragile. That's why diversity matters not just in ecosystems, but in ideas. Permaculture, agroforestry, indigenous land practices, urban gardening all offer different blueprints for living with green things rather than just extracting from them. It's not about choosing one path, it's about weaving them together. Technology can help, but it's not a substitute for care. The future might include skyscraper farms and gene-edited grains, but it must also include protected forests, community gardens, wildflower meadows, and ancient seeds passed down by hand. It must include the joy of watching something grow, the patience to let it, and the wisdom to know when not to interfere. Because plants are more than tools. They're the foundation of life on this planet. They made the air we breathe, the food we eat, the medicines we depend on, the soil under our feet, and they will shape our future whether we choose to listen or not. So, as we look ahead to a hotter world, a more crowded planet, a journey to the stars, the question isn't whether we'll need plants. We always will. The real question is, what kind of relationship do we want to have with them? And can we build a future where the green world thrives? Not just for us, but alongside us. It's a quiet thing, isn't it? The way plants keep us alive without ever making a sound. They don't shout for attention. They don't race or rage or rush. But with every breath you take, they're there, unseen, working gently in the background, spinning sunlight into sugar, turning air into nourishment, weaving life from nothing but light, water, and soil. Tonight, we've wandered through their world, from ancient oceans to mountaintop forests, from microscopic algae to sprawling farms in space, and underneath it all there's a quiet miracle that plants, rooted in place and moving at the pace of clouds, have built a planet where life can thrive. It's easy to forget how much we owe them. After all, green is everywhere, so familiar it disappears into the background. But perhaps now, with your eyes soft and your breath slow, you can feel that gentle presence in the food you ate today, the air in your lungs, the clothes on your back, the ground beneath your feet, all of it touched by something green. We began this journey with a question. How did something so still, so silent, end up building the very conditions for life? And the answer, in all its quiet wonder, is this. Plants didn't just build the conditions for life. They continue to be those conditions. Constant, patient, generous. Maybe the next time you pass a tree, or step around a patch of moss, or notice the way a houseplant leans toward the window, you'll pause even for a moment. Maybe you'll remember that you're walking through a living system upheld by roots and leaves and sunlight, a system that never asked for anything but gave you everything. And maybe in that pause you'll feel something like gratitude. So, wherever you are in the world, whether you're curled up under a quilt, swaying gently in a hammock, or listening in the hush of night, I hope you feel relaxed. I hope you feel safe, and I hope you carry with you a tiny green reminder that life, even at its quietest, is still growing. Thank you for spending this time with me here on The Sleepy Scientist. Thank you for letting your curiosity stretch out and wander. If this video kept you awake longer than expected, well, I warned you it might. But if you did drift off somewhere along the way, then perhaps the plants worked their magic after all. So, take one more slow, gentle breath, feel the weight of sleep settle in, and let the green world watch over you. Good night.